Hirme dort de hirne don all lefa gur foin, sin is stúrin arganívne, agus neart de gras de runna orin kunni de hort kun kriakona skurúche hosofer ar nille vrihir agus ar nille ganív faste agus triat a kriach noferi to Christ Ardina. Direct, we beseech thee, O Lord, our actions by thy holy inspirations and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, that every word and work of ours may always begin from thee and by thee be happily ended through Christ our Lord. Amen. Before calling on the Minister for Finance, I want to extend a warm welcome to Aaron O'Shea and Fidelma and his parents Fidelma and Martin from County Clare, and they're here with the Make-A-Wish Foundation. They're becoming regular visitors to Leinster House. Now I call on the Minister for Finance, Deputy Michael McGrath, to make his budget statement. Minister, you have 45 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Ciaran Corla, and I welcome the opportunity to present Budget 2024 alongside my colleague, Minister Donohoe, to the House here today. Budget 2024 is the first budget I will deliver as Minister for Finance. It is an enormous privilege to serve in this historic office, and I have a deep sense of the responsibility that comes with it. As Minister for Finance, it is my role, working with colleagues, to balance the needs of our society today while ensuring the well-being of our economy for generations to come. The budget will provide further support to individuals, families and businesses at a time when the cost of living is high. The budget will also provide for new investment in the public services on which we all depend, and continue to invest in the infrastructure we need for the future, including the largest home building programme for many decades. It will reaffirm the importance of our enterprise economy. It will ensure there is opportunity for all, while providing a safety net for those that need it. By any measure, Ireland is a modern, successful country, but we know we can do better, and we will. The annual budget is about setting out how we can help with the needs of today, but it is also about planning for the next 10, 20, 30 years. We have a window of opportunity now that we must grasp. Budget 2024 marks a step change in how we plan for the future, by putting in place a long-term plan that will make the economic future safer for all. Today I am announcing two new funds. The Future Ireland Fund, with a potential to grow to over €100 billion by the middle of the next decade, will help to protect living standards and public services for current and future generations. Separately, €14 billion will be put aside in the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund by 2030 to allow for sustained levels of investment in infrastructure in the event of economic downturns and to support climate and nature-related projects. These funds are vital to help future-proof our economy and our public finances, and I will outline more detail on these new funds shortly. Ciaran Corla, this government has navigated the Irish economy through unprecedented challenges: Brexit, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, and rates of inflation not seen for some 40 years. With the appropriate government support, our economy has rebounded strongly. There are many positives, including a country at full employment with a record high of over 2.6 million people at work. And this success should not be taken for granted or put at risk. However, we also acknowledge there are capacity constraints in the economy, and these are most obvious in the housing and the labour markets. Despite our positive economic performance, inflation continues to make life very difficult for many people. I welcome the fact that the rate of inflation has fallen, but I'm acutely aware that household budgets are stretched for many. That is why we are providing assistance in this budget, with an emphasis on those who need it the most. Ciaran Corla, Budget 2024 is being framed against a backdrop of considerable global uncertainty, both economic and increasingly geopolitical. The outlook for the global economy has deteriorated, and as one of the most economically open countries in the world, international developments have immediate repercussions for Ireland. Our key export markets are experiencing an economic slowdown, and this has impacted on our recent export performance. While the Irish economy is in a strong position today, I am all too well aware of the potential risks that may materialise from global events or sectoral shocks. Count Corlin, in the decade preceding the pandemic, inflation averaged just 0.5% per year. In 2022, inflation averaged over 8% across the year. This has a real bearing on the everyday lives of people and businesses throughout the country. The recent interest rate increases have also had a negative impact on many households and businesses. Thankfully, since this time last year, inflation has eased, with the most recent data showing inflation of 5% in September. I expect this trend will continue in the coming months, improving real household incomes and purchasing power. For many, the impact of inflation resulted in a deterioration in living standards in the last year. I expect living standards will improve for the vast majority in the next 12 months, with incomes growing faster than the rate of inflation. My department estimates an average inflation rate of just over 5.25% for this year. For next year, inflation of 2.9% is projected. We are now finally seeing a decline in consumer electricity and gas prices, albeit at a slower rate than we would like. And I know as we head into the winter, energy bills will be to the fore of people's minds. And this is why the government will once again be stepping in to provide direct help with household energy bills. My department estimates that modified domestic demand, MDD, a proxy for the domestic economy, will grow by 2.25% this year. For next year, we project it will also grow at the same rate. GNI Star, a deglobalised measure of national income, is projected to grow by 2% this year and next, broadly in line with the path for modified domestic demand. These forecasts have been endorsed by the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council. I am acutely aware that fiscal policy must be carefully designed with inflationary pressures in mind. Careful management of the public finances has allowed the government to provide €12 billion in direct assistance to help deal with the cost of living pressures since the beginning of last year. In Budget 2024, I believe we have struck the right balance between providing support for our economy and society while not unduly adding to inflation. This House has heard me on many occasions referencing the vulnerabilities of our public finances. My department is forecasting tax revenue will reach €88.3 billion this year. For the first time in a number of years, this is a downward revision for 2023 compared to earlier expectations. This is due to lower than expected corporation tax receipts, which, as we know, fell sharply in the summer. It is, of course, a highly concentrated revenue stream, and it's important to note that our strong income tax receipts are also highly correlated with our corporation tax receipts. My department estimates that windfall corporation tax receipts now stand at around €10 to €12 billion. It is clearly welcome that our public finances are in a relatively strong position, especially given the level of support that has been made available by government over the last number of years. However, growth in tax receipts in 2023 was notably more modest than in recent years, and this is also expected to be the case for next year. I can inform the House that we are projecting a general government surplus of €8.8 billion, or 3% of national income this year, and €8.4 billion, or 2.7% next year. It is incumbent upon this government to ensure that while welcoming the strong surplus, we also acknowledge that if we were to remove windfall corporation tax receipts, we would record an underlying government deficit of €2 billion in the current year. Therefore, we must use windfall receipts wisely and not allow them to fund permanent expenditures. Sovereign borrowing costs have been on an upward trajectory and have in recent days risen to levels not seen in over a decade, as markets appear to be absorbing the higher for longer message coming from global central banks. The Irish 10-year yield is currently 3.3%, considerably higher than it was at this time last year. The structure of Irish public debt, with long maturities and strong cash balances, means the debt service bill should stay quite stable for the coming 3 to 4 years, but costs are likely to rise later in the decade as low coupon debt matures and it is refinanced at likely much higher rates. Our debt is moving in the right direction. On the current path, we will be below €200 billion by the end of the decade and lower again as a percentage of national income, but this does not mean that we can be complacent. The Government decided in the summer economic statement to temporarily adjust its medium-term spending rule to reflect the reality of the economic backdrop that we are now experiencing. Net core public spending will increase by 6.1% next year, rather than the 5% originally set out. This decision reflects the fact that inflation is projected to be above trend for next year. Assuming inflation falls to more normal levels, core spending will be allowed to grow by 5% from 2025 onwards, in line with the medium-term budgetary strategy. Today, I am announcing a total budget package of €14 billion. Budget 2024 consists of a core expenditure package of just under €5.3 billion and a tax package of over €1.1 billion, a total core package of €6.4 billion. This is in line with the budgetary parameters set out in the summer economic statement last July. There is also a package of once-off cost of living measures of €2.7 billion, net of windfall revenues from the energy sector. In addition, there is non-core expenditure of €4.75 billion, including an additional €250 million for the public capital programme funded by windfall corporate tax receipts. I am announcing today, Ceann Comhairle, a personal income tax package to the value of €1.3 billion. As incomes rise, it is vital that adjustments are made to our personal tax system. In the absence of this, workers and many pensioners would experience an increase in the burden of tax in real terms, resulting in a drop in living standards. The competitiveness of our personal tax system is also a factor in inward investment decisions. I am therefore announcing the following changes. I am increasing the personal, employee, PAYE and earned income tax credits by €100 each. I am increasing the standard rate income tax cut-off point by €2,000 to bring the entry point to the higher rate of income tax to €42,000. I am reducing the 4.5% rate of USC to 4%, the first reduction in USC rates in 5 years. Following government approval this morning, as of 1 January next year, the national minimum wage will increase by €1.40 per hour to €12.70 per hour. Therefore, to ensure that such workers remain outside of the higher rates of USC, I will be raising the entry threshold to the 4% rate to €25,760 in line with the increase in the national minimum wage. A full-time worker on the minimum wage will see an increase in their net take-home pay of approximately €2,300 on an annual basis. The total value of the USC changes I am announcing today amounts to €350 million next year and €400 million in a full year. It represents the largest USC package since 2016, and taken together with the income tax changes I am announcing, will provide much-needed assistance to taxpayers across all income levels. Taking the example of a single person earning €46,000 in 2024, they will see an increase of over €2,000 in their net income as a result of cumulative income tax and USC changes since 2021. This year's budget has a particular focus on tackling child poverty. I am making a number of further taxation changes to assist families with children. I am increasing both the home carer tax credit and the single-person child carer credit by €100 and increasing the incapacitated child tax credit by €200. I am extending the USC concession, which applies to those who have a medical card and earn less than €60,000 per year, for a further 2 years until the end of 2025. I will now address some of the other elements of the Government's cost of living package, Ceann Comhairle. I am proposing to extend the 9% reduced VAT rate for gas and electricity for a further 12 months. It's estimated that consumers will save an additional €90 for electricity, and those who use gas will save an additional €62 on average during the 12-month extension. I am conscious that the price of petrol and diesel for motorists have increased in recent weeks, driven by volatility in international oil prices. I have therefore decided to defer the final tranche of the fuel excise increases, which were due to happen at the end of this month. I will restore the outstanding amounts of 8 cents on petrol, 6 cents on diesel and 3.4 cents on marked gas oil in 2 equal instalments on 1 April 2024 and 1 August 2024. I will introduce financial resolutions on both these matters later this evening. In last year's budget, the Government introduced a rent tax credit to support renters. As of the end of September, over 290,000 rent tax credit claims have been made, with close to €166 million claimed to date, and I am pleased to be in a position to increase the value of the rent tax credit from €500 per year to €750 per year for 2024. In addition, I have decided to make an amendment to allow parents who pay for their student children who have tenancies in rent-a-room or digs accommodation to claim the rent tax credit. This will also be backdated to allow for claims to be made for the 2022 and the 2023 tax years. I am acutely conscious of the impact of rising interest rates and mortgage costs on many households. It is not possible or desirable for government to attempt to mitigate in full the impact of increased interest rates. However, what we have experienced in the past 14 months is exceptional in the history of monetary union, and 10 successive interest rate increases have put many mortgage holders under considerable pressure. I have therefore decided to introduce a one-year mortgage interest tax relief for homeowners with an outstanding mortgage balance on their primary dwelling house of between €80,000 and €500,000 as of the 31st of December 2022. Relief will be available in respect of the increased interest paid on the mortgage in the calendar year 2023 as compared with the amount paid in 2022 at a standard rate of 20% of income tax. The relief will be capped at €1,250 per property. Approximately 165,000 mortgage holders will benefit from this measure, with an estimated cost of €125 million. In relation to the benefit in kind regime, for company vehicles, I am extending for a further year the temporary universal relief of €10,000 to the original market value, which I announced earlier this year. And in order to encourage the use of electric vehicles for company car purposes, I am temporarily suspending the tapering of the preferential BIK relief. I am therefore maintaining the existing €35,000 original market value reduction for 2024 and 2025, and taken together with the extension of the universal original market value relief of €10,000, this measure will mean that an employee with an electric company vehicle will see an overall BIK original market value relief of €45,000 next year. On behalf of Minister of State Carol McNeill and myself, I am pleased to announce a 1% reduction to the Motor Insurers Insolvency Compensation Fund levy, benefiting up to 2.2 million policyholders on renewal from the 1st of January 2024. In the course of my work as a constituency TD for over 16 years, I have observed that many people do not fully claim all the tax relief that they are due. Revenue estimates that €180 million in refunds could potentially be due to taxpayers for 2022 alone. I will shortly be launching an extensive public information campaign with Revenue to raise awareness of the range of tax credits and reliefs available to PAYE taxpayers to ensure that people can avail of their full entitlements and receive any refunds that are due. Housing is undoubtedly the biggest domestic challenge we face today and remains a top priority for government. Housing for All represents the biggest investment in housing in our history. Last year, we delivered 7,500 new-build social homes, 43% higher than the previous year, and the highest number of new-build social homes delivered since 1975. Minister Donohoe will set out our investment plans for next year, with funding for thousands of social, cost rental and affordable homes across the country. Since its introduction, the Help to Buy scheme has supported over 40,000 people in to purchase their own home. And to give certainty to prospective home buyers and to the market, I can confirm I intend to extend the Help to Buy scheme to the end of 2025 and will consider across next year if any changes are required to the scheme. Some people availing of the Local Authority Affordable Purchase Scheme have found that they do not qualify for the Help to Buy scheme under the current rules. Therefore, I am amending the scheme to ensure that applicants of the Local Authority Affordable Purchase Scheme can avail of Help to Buy. This change will take effect from tomorrow and will run from the revised end of the scheme in 2025. Count Corla have already announced an increase in the rent tax credit for 2024. For every tenant, there has to be a landlord. In recent years, we have seen a decline in the number of small investors in the market owning 1 or 2 properties. 86% of landlords in the market own just 1 or 2 properties, and they have a vital role to play. With that in mind, I'm introducing a temporary tax relief which will primarily benefit small landlords, subject to certain conditions being met: rental income of €3,000 for the year 2024, €4,000 for 2025 and €5,000 for the years 2026 and 27 will be disregarded at the standard rate of income tax. An important condition of this measure is that the properties held by the landlord availing of the relief must remain in the rental market for the full 4 years. Otherwise, the full amount of the relief will be clawed back. Further details are contained in the budget documentation. Tackling vacancy, Count Corla, is a priority for this government. It is appropriate that every available lever is deployed to incentivise the use of existing housing stock across the country. This includes measures to deter vacancy, alongside supportive measures such as grants. For this reason, I am increasing the vacant homes tax, introduced last year, to 5 times the property's existing basic local property tax rate. This increase will take effect from the next chargeable period, commencing in November. The Residential Zoned Land Tax, or RZLT, is an important initiative to activate suitably zoned and serviced land for housing. It is important that affected landowners have sufficient opportunity to engage with the mapping process and that a fair and transparent process is applied when the local authorities consider what land should be placed on the RZLT maps. Therefore, I am extending the liability date of the tax by 1 year to allow for the planned 2024 review of maps to take place and to afford affected people with a further opportunity to engage with the process. Count Corla, the government's ability to respond swiftly with financial support during recent crises was due to our strong public finances, which in no small part are a result of the taxes paid by the business sector. From the large multinational corporations to the small and medium enterprises which operate in every town, village and city across Ireland, it's my priority to ensure that we have an environment which allows businesses to thrive. In next week's Finance Bill, I will be publishing legislation to implement the 15% minimum effective tax rate for large companies as provided for under the OECD Pillar 2 agreement. This is a once-in-a-generation reform to our corporation tax system and marks the culmination of a 10-year global project to reform the taxation of multinational enterprises. I recently announced that a participation exemption for foreign-sourced dividends will be legislated for in Finance Bill 2024, with the detailed development work to take place over the coming months. This will be a significant first step in reducing the administrative burden on businesses. In relation to Ireland's current regime for interest deductibility, this is a complex area which will take some time to work through, and I have committed to engaging with stakeholders on the issue over the period ahead. Indigenous businesses are the backbone of the economy, and upon taking office, I set about reviewing the enterprise supports in our tax system to identify improvements fit for a modern and dynamic economy. I have met and listened to business organisations and representative bodies across the country and have carefully considered their proposals and concerns. In this context, I am announcing a package of wide-ranging measures to support Irish enterprise, which I believe will make a very positive difference. The Research and Development Tax Credit is a crucial feature of Ireland's corporation tax offering and enables us to remain competitive in attracting quality employment and investment in R&D. I am increasing the R&D tax credit from 25% to 30%. This will maintain the net value of the existing credit for those businesses subject to the new 15% minimum effective tax rate, while also delivering a real increase in the credit to those smaller companies who will not be in scope of Pillar 2. I am doubling the first-year payment threshold from €25,000 to €50,000 to provide valuable cash flow support to companies engaged in smaller R&D projects. I hope this will encourage more businesses to engage with the regime. My department has completed a cost-benefit analysis of revised entrepreneur relief, which was published today with the budget papers. I've asked my officials to examine opportunities to refocus the relief with a view to further improving the incentives for founders and entrepreneurs in the innovative start-up phase and to ensure it is contributing to employment creation. I am today announcing a new targeted capital gains tax relief for angel investors in innovative start-up SMEs. This aims to assist SMEs in attracting investment and make Ireland a more attractive location for angel investment. It will allow angel investors to benefit from a reduced rate of capital gains tax when they dispose of a qualifying investment for gains up to twice the value of their investment. The Employment Investment Incentive Scheme provides SMEs and start-ups with an alternative source of funding. I will be enhancing the scheme by standardising the investment period to 4 years for all investments and doubling the amount an investor can claim relief on for 4-year investments to €500,000. These enhancements will help unlock more equity investment in smaller, early-stage businesses, which are typically those that are most in need of funding. My officials will also undertake a further review of EII in early 2024, which will focus on the potential for further simplification of the scheme, while taking account of the conditionality imposed by the EU General Block Exemption Regulation. Retirement relief supports the intergenerational transfer of businesses and farms and works to ensure their smooth transition so that they continue to play an important role in the Irish economy. In line with government policy on the age of retirement, I am extending the upper age limit for the relief from 65 until the age of 70. The reduced relief, which was available on disposals from age 66 onwards, will now apply from the age of 70. These changes will come into effect from the 1st of January 2025 so as to allow for an appropriate transitional period. I will also introduce a limit on disposals to a child up to the age of 70 as recommended by the Commission on Tax and Welfare. The Key Employee Engagement Programme is an important scheme aimed at improving the attractiveness of the SME employment offering, and I am pleased to announce that I have now secured EU state aid approval to commence the outstanding 22 amendments to this programme. The amendments include the extension of the scheme to the end of 2025 and a doubling of the limit for the total market value of issued but unexercised qualifying share options from €3 million to €6 million. These amendments will be commenced by ministerial order shortly. We have all taken great pride in the huge success of the Irish audiovisual sector in recent years, reflected in the numerous accolades awarded to Irish productions. Top quality content is being made in Ireland, largely due to the funding offered through the Section 481 film tax credit. Such productions provide a tangible economic benefit to our country through jobs, skills development, regional development and spend on local goods and services. They are also vital in the promotion of Irish culture to audiences at home and indeed abroad. So today I am providing for an increase in the current project cap on qualifying expenditure in the Section 481 film tax credit from €70 million to €125 million, subject to state aid approval. This will support the continuing development of a robust and creative film sector in Ireland. In addition, my officials will shortly begin engagement with the European Commission with a view to developing an incentive for the unscripted production sector in line with state aid rules. I propose to increase the existing VAT registration thresholds for businesses from €37,500 for services and €75,000 for goods to €40,000 for services and €80,000 for goods, respectively. While modest, these changes will provide more latitude to small businesses whose turnover is close to the existing thresholds and is broadly in line with forthcoming EU VAT registration thresholds. Ceann Comhairle, one of the messages that I have heard clearly from my engagement with the business community is that the rules and requirements surrounding tax reliefs and schemes are complex, which can make them difficult to access. Tax reliefs, by their nature, are complex, and there are certain requirements that cannot be modified, particularly due to EU state aid and other international rules and considerations. However, I am determined to ensure that all businesses, especially small and medium-sized enterprises throughout the country, know what they are entitled to claim and can access all appropriate schemes and reliefs. I know that Revenue is committed to continuing to support businesses by making it as easy as possible to avail of the vast range of business support schemes that it administers so well on behalf of the state. And as part of this ongoing commitment, Revenue will, in the coming weeks, establish a dedicated Tax Administration Liaison Committee subgroup focused on identifying any opportunities to simplify and modernise the administration of business supports. The terms of reference of this subgroup will be agreed at TALC, and a report on the recommendations of the subgroup will be delivered during the course of next year. Finally, I would like to announce that the Revenue Commissioners will shortly launch a public consultation on how we can use digital advances to modernise Ireland's VAT invoicing and reporting system. In addition, my officials will shortly be launching a public consultation on share-based remuneration, recognising the increasing importance that business places on share-based remuneration in rewarding and retaining employees and the continued globalisation of the workforce. And I would encourage all stakeholders to submit their views and proposals on both these initiatives over the period ahead. Ceann Comhairle, my department is currently undertaking a review of the funds sector. The review is on track to report to me in summer 2024 and will include consideration of life assurance exit tax and the taxation of funds, including exchange-traded funds for Irish investors more generally. Following the completion of this review, I will consider whether any changes to the current taxation framework are appropriate. In recent weeks and months, we have again seen the devastating impact of climate change, Ceann Comhairle, on communities around the world. Extreme heat waves, droughts and wildfires have swept across many parts of the world, and 2023 is now virtually certain to be the warmest year since records began in the mid-1800s. Today, the Government is further demonstrating its commitment to climate action with the establishment of the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund, and I will provide further details on how this fund will operate in a few moments. But first, I want to outline a number of climate-related taxation measures. I'm extending the Accelerated Capital Allowances Scheme for energy-efficient equipment for a further 2 years. I'm also doubling the tax disregard in respect of personal income received by households who sell residual electricity from microgeneration back to the national grid. From the 1st of January 2024, an income disregard of up to €400 per year will apply to profits or gains arising to a qualifying person from the microgeneration of electricity. This will provide relief from income tax, but also from universal social charge and from PRSI. Ceann Comhairle, I introduced a measure in the Finance Act 2023 to reduce the VAT rate on the supply and installation of solar panels for private dwellings to zero from the 1st of May this year. I am extending this measure to schools with effect from the 1st of January 2024. I am extending the VRT relief for battery electric vehicles for a further 2 years to the end of 2025. This relief applies to battery electric vehicles with a value of up to €50,000. The rate per tonne of carbon dioxide emitted for petrol and diesel will go up from €48.50 to €56 from the 11th of October, as per the trajectory set out in the Finance Act of 2020. And as per the commitment in the programme for government, all of the revenue raised from this increase in carbon tax will be used to ensure the most vulnerable are protected from the unintended impacts of the tax increase, to part fund a socially progressive national retrofitting programme, and to encourage and support farmers all over Ireland in the green transition. I wish to announce a number of other new measures in Budget 2024, Ceann Comhairle. An issue which has been raised regularly with me, including by colleagues across the House, is the VAT treatment of audiobooks and e-books. E-books are currently subject to a VAT rate of 9%, unlike printed books, which are zero rated. Audiobooks are not currently included in the VAT zero rating. Therefore, I have decided to zero rate these items from the 1st of January 2024. It is important, Ceann Comhairle, that the wider familial relationships that foster children have by virtue of their foster parents are recognised for inheritance and gift tax purposes. In line with the Commission on Tax and Welfare recommendation, I will bring forward amendments to ensure that foster children can avail of the Group B capital acquisition tax threshold based on their relationship to their foster parents. Ceann Comhairle, farming is the lifeblood of rural communities across our country, and a number of important agricultural tax reliefs are currently due to expire at the end of this year. These reliefs provide important supports to our farmers and to the farming sector generally, as we all know. Consanguinity relief is a vital measure which supports the transfer of farms from one generation to the next. I will extend this relief for a period of 5 years to provide more certainty to farming families as they plan for the future over the years ahead. I am also extending the accelerated capital allowances for farm safety equipment, and I am increasing the maximum aggregate lifetime limit of a number of farm-related reliefs to €100,000, which is the maximum allowable under the new EU agricultural block exemption regulation, which came into effect on the 1st of January. These reliefs include the Young Trained Farmer Stamp Duty relief, stock relief for young trained farmers, and the relief for succession farm partnerships. The maximum amount of enhanced stock relief for farmers who are partners in a registered farm partnership will be increased from €15,000 to €20,000 in line with the maximum permitted under the EU regulations. The land leasing income tax relief will be amended so that it only becomes available when the land has been owned for 7 years, so that it is better targeted to active farmers. Ceann Comhairle, it is important that the banking sector continues to make a contribution to the Irish economy following the support they received from taxpayers during the financial crisis. And in this context, I've put a plan in place to introduce a revised bank levy in 2024 to raise €200 million. I will review the levy again next year to ensure that it remains appropriately calibrated. I am increasing Ceann Comhairle excise duty on a packet of 20 cigarettes by 75 cents, with a pro-rata increase on other tobacco products. This will bring the price of cigarettes in the most popular price category to €16.75 and supports public health policy to reduce smoking levels further in Irish society. A financial resolution will be introduced tonight to enact this measure. Ceann Comhairle, in light of public health interests, continuing delays to the revision of the Tobacco Products Tax Directive at an EU level, and indeed the programme for government commitment to tax e-cigarettes and vaping products, I am proposing to introduce a domestic tax on these products in next year's budget. Considerable preparatory work will need to be carried out by my department and the Revenue Commissioners in drafting this legislation over the period ahead. Ceann Comhairle, due to the important role the charity and community sector plays in ensuring that the most vulnerable people across our society are supported, I have decided to increase the funds available under the Charity VAT Compensation Scheme from €5 million to €10 million. And in simple terms, what this will mean for charities is that they will get back more of the VAT that they pay on the goods and services that they produce. That they purchase. I am also increasing the threshold for tax relief on the donation of heritage items from €6 million to €8 million. Ireland, as we all well know, has a very rich sporting culture, and I believe we need to fully utilise the opportunities to invest in our sporting facilities and clubs. Our taxation system currently provides a number of reliefs to sporting organisations and to charities, but I believe that there is potential to do more. To assist our national governing bodies with their capital programmes, I intend to examine how the tax system can be utilised to further support these organisations with the upgrade of their facilities or the development of new ones. This will involve examining the tax treatment of long-term strategic development funds established by approved sporting bodies to promote capital investment in our sports facilities, and I will conclude this work next year. Additionally, I am committed to considering how our tax system can better encourage and support philanthropy, and I will be engaging extensively over the period ahead on this issue. Ceann Comhairle, the prospect of headline budgetary surpluses in the coming years affords us an opportunity to prepare now for the challenges that we know are on the horizon. I will now provide more details in relation to the two funds that we propose to establish. We will put in place a new savings fund to be called the Future Ireland Fund, using some of the windfall corporate tax receipts. And to be clear, this is not a rainy day fund, because it is for costs that we know are coming our way in the years ahead. This fund will benefit all of us, the children of today, people of working age today, our pensioners, and yes, also future generations. It will help us to meet the costs of running the state in the future, and it will make a contribution to the cost of healthcare, of pensions, home care, and much more. For example, we know we are facing considerable costs in relation to an ageing population. Age-related spending will be around €7 to €8 billion higher by the end of this decade than it was at the start of this decade. This is simply the standstill cost and does not involve any new measures or any new policy initiatives. The twin transitions of digital and climate, while more difficult to quantify, will also involve significant costs. It is imperative that we act now. I am announcing that we will invest 0.8% of GDP annually into the Future Ireland Fund from 2024 to 2035. This will be a sum of approximately €4.3 billion in 2024. In addition, we will transfer seed funding of just over €4 billion into the fund next year from the dissolution of the current National Reserve Fund. It is expected that with a funding level of 0.8% of GDP annually, the fund could potentially reach a total of €100 billion by 2035. It is intended to preserve the fund over a longer period, and that the investment return will be used to support government expenditure. It will be a matter for the government of the day, when the drawdown occurs, to use the return from the fund appropriately. And Ceann Comhairle, there are, of course, risks that could crystallise over the contribution period ahead, such as a national or a global economic shock or reduced corporate tax receipts. But as we stand here today in this House, this is a realistic and an achievable plan for Ireland, and the window of opportunity will not remain open for indefinitely, and we must seize it now. The second fund, the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund, will also invest a portion of the windfall corporate taxes and is intended to operate in a counter-cyclical manner in terms of fiscal and economic stress to provide resources for capital investment. The fund will grow incrementally by €2 billion for 7 consecutive years, when it will reach €14 billion plus interest accrued. In 2024, the first €2 billion contribution will come from the dissolution of the National Reserve Fund. While it is important that we prevent a reoccurrence of stop-start public capital investment, as we have seen in the past, and that we invest through the economic cycle at whatever stage of that cycle we may be, we must also consider the known challenges facing our society and economy. The impact from rising global temperatures as a result of climate change will affect all parts of our society. No one will escape. This government has taken action to manage the transition to a climate-neutral and climate-resilient society in the knowledge that it will have macroeconomic and fiscal implications for all of us. And in this regard, The Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund will have a climate and nature component worth over €3 billion, the aim of which is to help the achievement of carbon budgets through capital projects where it is clear our climate targets are not being reached. Both funds will be vested in the Minister for Finance and will be managed and invested by the National Treasury Management Agency, subject to an investment policy and investment strategy. The funds will be audited by the Controller and Auditor General. I have this morning secured government approval for the heads of bill, providing for the establishment of these two new funds, and I do hope, Count Corla, that there will be a broad consensus across this House in support of this strategically important legislation for our country. Count Corla, as we stand here today, I believe there is so much in our country that we can be proud of. Full employment, a growing economy, budget surpluses, a national debt that is falling, a population that is rising, and now a plan to secure the future. We can never take any of this for granted, and we must always strive to do better. Today's budget provides help to households and businesses. It reaffirms our commitment to good quality public services and to investment in modern infrastructure. It seeks to unlock the further potential in the enterprise sector. It underpins our determination to tackle climate change, and the budget seeks to make the future safer for all of us. We face challenges for sure, but we face them from a position of strength, and we face them together. I commend this budget to the House.
Thank you very much, Minister. We now proceed to hear the Minister for Public Expenditure, National Development Plan Delivery and Reform. Minister Paschal Donohoe, please.
Count Corla. Recent budgets in this House have responded to Brexit, to a pandemic, to the war in Ukraine and now to the rising cost of living. And in response to all of these challenges, government has helped. Businesses received huge support while their trade was disrupted due to COVID. The wages of those impacted by a pandemic were supported. Shelter and warmth has been provided to those fleeing conflict. Significant help was provided and is provided to those coping with large increases in the cost of living. All of this was done from a position of strength. The Government, Minister McGrath and I are deeply aware of the needs of so many, and this is why those actions were taken. But Ireland is still a great country to call home, a safe place in which to live, and a nation which takes its responsibilities to its citizens and to other nations seriously. We are aware of what we owe to each other, particularly our most vulnerable, and we are aware of what we owe to generations to come. This strength is mirrored in our economy. In recent years, we have returned our public finances to surplus twice. We have now decided to set up funds to make best use of those surpluses. We have reduced the burden of our national debt, and we have never had more people working in our country. I remember the opposition to setting up the Rainy Day Fund, then the National Reserve Fund. Well, we know their value now. This economic resilience, the importance of carefully managing our public finances, is at times a difficult argument to make, making the case for not spending every cent we have. But it allowed the government to help last year when prices began to rise, and it will allow us to help again as the cost of living is still a challenge for so many. €12 billion in cost of living supports have been provided over the last 2 years to families, to businesses, to community organisations, meaning that for many, the supports provided have significantly reduced the impact of inflation. However, even as inflation falls and energy bills begin to decrease. We are conscious that many people listening today are so concerned about rising costs, and particularly the challenge of lighting, of heating their homes this winter. So this budget provides an immediate and a substantial response across 2023 and 2024. Our supports are also targeted to those who need them the most, to older persons, to households with young people, and to those with a disability. So today I am announcing that all households will receive a further set of credits to assist with energy bills over the winter period. 3 credits of €150 each will be provided between the end of this year and April of next year. A €300 lump sum will be made to recipients of the fuel allowance in the last quarter of the year. An additional €200 will be paid this year to recipients of the Living Alone allowance, and for those in receipt of regular social protection payments, I can confirm to the House that the Christmas bonus will be paid in early December. In addition to this, those in support of a weekly social welfare payment will receive a once-off double-week cost of living support payment to all qualifying social protection recipients. This will be paid in January. It will include pensioners, carers, those on disability payments and job seekers. And to support those most in need, a special one-off payment of €400 will be made before Christmas to those who received a carers support grant, disability allowance, blind pension, invalidity pension and the domiciliary care allowance. This is a budget that makes concrete progress in ensuring that Ireland is one of the best places in the world to be a child. A double payment of the child payment, worth an additional €140 for each child, will be made to all qualifying households before Christmas, with a double payment of the foster care allowance to also be made this year. To ensure that our supports are also targeted to those families that need them the most, I'm also announcing that a €400 lump sum payment will be made to recipients of the Working Family Payment later this year. For the first time, this budget provides for a lump sum payment to each child in receipt of the qualified child increase. To assist families with the cost of education, I'm announcing an extension of the fee waiver on school transport services for the year, an extension of the fee waiver for students sitting state exams, and a €60 million capitation payment for schools so that they can continue to meet increased running costs and funding for supports of the most disadvantaged groups. I'm also providing a one-off reduction in the student contribution fee by €1,000 for fee-free students, a one-off reduction of approximately 33% in the contribution fee for apprentices in higher education, and an increase in the postgraduate tuition fee contribution by €1,000 for student grant recipients. Recognising the rising costs also have an impact for businesses across the country, I'm today announcing a scheme of business supports worth €250 million. So, Ceann Comhairle, this represents a package of supports worth, over this year and next, €2.3 billion. The payments that I am announcing are clearly substantial. They are needed because the cost of living, as we all know, is still rising. They are, however, of a lower value than a year ago because the cost of living is not rising as fast as it was a year ago. Prices are high, but inflation is falling, and wages and core payment rates are increasing to fill that gap. These supports reflect that. It is right that temporary challenges are addressed with temporary measures. They cannot become an unaffordable element of ongoing spending. These payments are nature and they're changing as the level of inflation falls. I now want to outline our broader approach to public spending. It is based on a commitment to safe public finances. The reason the government can deliver further cost of living measures is because we have run and run budget surpluses and because our public debt is manageable. While we cannot meet every demand, we know and we do our best to meet most needs for today and also for tomorrow. And this budget is a further step in that direction. In devising our strategy, we ask ourselves, do we spend the current receipts, the current excess receipts from corporation tax, or do we plan for progressive growth in public services while retaining exceptional receipts to invest in and for future generations? We entered this year in a strong position. Our resilience in the aftermath of the pandemic and energy price shocks is mostly due to the public spending policies the government pursued over the past number of years. These policy choices did not happen by accident. And to maintain this balanced, this planned approach, while smoothing the impact of inflation, Minister McGrath and I announced plans in the summer economic statement for an overall budget package of €91.2 billion for 2024. This includes an additional €5.3 billion over what was announced this time last year and €1 billion more than had been initially planned for 2024. In capital, an additional €900 million is being made available under the National Development Plan. This will support the delivery of the most ambitious and the greenest infrastructure plan in the history of our state. €250 million from those corporation tax that we believe to be temporary in nature will further support this ambition and accelerate the delivery of projects that are almost at completion. This is part of a programme of additional capital investment of €2.25 billion over the years 2024 to 2026. These core plans are in line with what was announced in the summer economic statement. And in addition to the temporary cost of living measures that I've already outlined, I'm announcing further non-core funding of €4.5 billion. This will support the response to exceptional circumstances, including the ongoing impact of COVID-19 on our health services and our humanitarian response to the war in Ukraine and the increased demand for international protection in our country. The past year and a half has seen a dramatic increase in the number of people arriving to our shores seeking our help. Ireland has always been a welcoming country, and I commend communities across our country for opening their hearts, for opening their homes and welcoming those fleeing war. The selfless acts of kindness that the Irish people have demonstrated during that time to those seeking support and protection highlights the best of our nature. And taken together, these measures will put in place the building blocks for further improvements in the delivery of our public services and support a fair and equitable response to the needs that our people face today. So, Ceann Comhairle, this is a budget for building a better future for our country. And this starts with making our country one of the best places on earth in which to be a child. Ending child poverty remains a core ambition of this government, and the Child Poverty Unit is now established in the Department of the Taoiseach. And in August, the government published a programme plan on child poverty and child well-being to transform the lives of our youngest citizens, and that plan is reflected in this budget. We will continue to improve our understanding in this area, and I've allocated an additional €1 million to the Central Statistics Office for the Growing Up in Ireland survey to meet that goal. But in addition to the direct supports to family income that I outlined as part of our cost of living package, I'm announcing the following permanent changes to our social protection payments, specifically targeting the well-being of children. I'm raising the qualified child increase by €4 to €46 per week for under 12s and €54 per week for over 12s. The Hot School Meals programme will be expanded to a further 900 primary schools in April of 2024. Parents' benefits will be extended to 9 weeks from August 2024, and I'm also increasing the monthly rate of the domiciliary care allowance by €10, extending the child benefit payment to 18-year-olds in full-time education, and raising the income threshold on the working family payment by €54 per week. Building on this, I am allocating a further €338 million to the core spending of the Department of Children, Equality, Disability, Integration and Youth. We're building on last year's investment in childcare. The National Childcare Scheme will see a further 25% reduction in childcare costs, which is evidence of our commitment to making childcare affordable and will be implemented from September of 2024. We're also increasing investment on the supply side through additional core funding. This will support providers, support workers and help maintain the fee freeze, and we will increase the statutory foster care rate by the end of 2024 by €75 per week for children under 12 and €73 per week for children over 12, bringing it to €400 and €425 per week respectively. Further supports to that department will provide €64 million for investment in disability services to deliver 90 more additional residential places, further development of respite services, 1,400 day places for school leavers, increased personal assistance hours and rate increases for staff who are providing these home supports. Education, as we know so well, is vital for investing in our children, vital for supporting our future. That is why this budget will allocate €10.5 billion to the Department of Education in 2024, including a capital budget of €940 million. This will facilitate the continued rollout of urgently needed school building projects, including the 300 building projects already underway. A further 200 will commence construction over the course of 2024 and 2025. This builds on the progress we have made in building a more inclusive education system and will provide for over 740 additional teachers to support those with special education needs in special classes, in special schools and in mainstream settings. I'm also providing for over 1,200 additional SNAs, giving us the highest number of SNAs we've ever had in our education system. This will provide additional resources to our special schools to support them in the vital work they do in supporting our most vulnerable students. Ceann Comhairle, reducing the cost of education is also a priority for this government, which is why I am providing funding to extend the free school book scheme to all junior cycle pupils in recognised post-primary schools within the free education scheme from September next year, and this will benefit over 200,000 pupils. Further measures include capitation payments to schools from the beginning of 2024 and a €50 million increase in funding for school transport. These announcements represent further important strides in transforming the quality, the affordability and the inclusivity of our education system. But while providing these supports, we also need to ensure that our welfare system improves living standards and helps all fulfil their potential. I'm announcing a social protection package for 2024 worth almost €1.1 billion. It is targeted to those with the greatest need, in particular our children. This includes, for an individual in receipt of a weekly social protection payment, I am providing for an increase of €12 per week. To further support those with a disability and to support our carers, I am increasing the carers allowance means test disregard to €450 for a single person and €900 for a couple. I'm allocating additional funds to provide free travel for people medically certified unfit to drive and reducing the minimum weekly hours threshold for eligibility for the wage subsidy scheme from 21 hours to 15. The Minister for Finance has announced as a one-off tax scheme a plan to further offset increased mortgage costs for eligible claimants in early 2024. And further to this, my colleague, the Minister for Social Protection, will work with the Minister to provide a payment where necessary through the Department of Social Protection, with the details to follow. It's also important that we begin to address the long-term sustainability challenges faced by our pension scheme. Earlier this year, the government decided against increasing the pension age, but instead decided to take a measured approach to increasing PRSI contributions on a gradual basis over a number of years. It's therefore appropriate that we act now to increase PRSI contribution rates. So from October the 1st next year, all PRSI contribution rates will increase by 0.1%. This measure, which will raise €240 million in a full year, is a modest, but it is a necessary step to secure pension entitlements for this and also for future generations. The Minister for Social Protection will also bring forward proposals on a new pay-related benefit in advance of the Social Welfare Bill. Taken together, the measures that we are introducing throughout the remainder of this year and next year represent substantial levels of state support for our most vulnerable. And over the past 2 years, the government has successfully combined increases in core social welfare payments in combination with a series of targeted cost of living packages to provide the most protection to those households with the lowest incomes from the impact of inflation. This budget builds on that approach. And to continue to provide support where it is needed, the provision of housing continues to be an absolute priority for this government. Housing delivery is performing strongly, with more than 21,000 new homes started in the first 8 months of the year, meaning that we now expect to exceed our target of delivering 29,000 new homes by the end of the year. As a result of this progress, around 400 first-time buyers are purchasing their own home each week. And next year, we will accelerate this progress with just under €7 billion of funding to the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, of which €2.6 billion will be capital investment in housing. This will be added to, it will be supplemented by the Land Development Agency investment and by Housing Finance Agency lending, resulting in an overall capital provision for housing of over €5 billion for 2024. So some of the measures included in that are as follows. €1.9 billion in capital funding to deliver 9,300 new-build social homes. €265 million to support the delivery of 6,400 affordable homes, €242 million for homeless services and accommodation, and a further €35 million to support the Housing First initiative and home homeless adults in permanent homes with full supports. €90 million to the retrofitting of social housing in 2024, which demonstrates the state's commitment to help people reduce their energy bills and ensure our country meets our climate targets. €207 million will also be provided at bringing back into supply vacant and derelict units through the Voids programme and Croí Cónaithe Town's vacant grant scheme to support the regeneration of towns through the Urban Regeneration Development Fund. These measures renew our commitment to deliver housing for all, which will see us deliver 300,000 new homes by 2030. And just as housing has been a challenge for our society, a challenge that we are rising to, so of course the last 3.5 years have been a period of great challenge for our health services. Similar to other countries, the health sector continues to experience the impacts of the post-emergency phase of the pandemic. And in recognition of these challenges, the government has prioritised very significant investment in our health services with a level of spending without precedent. As a result of this, we spend more of our national health than many other countries on health, more of our national income on health than many other countries. And this investment is delivering an expansion in capacity through the funding of over 2,500 additional beds in hospital community settings and an increase of over 22,000 staff through additional recruitment. We have cut costs for patients across the board. We have removed hospital charges. We have had the biggest expansion of access to free GP care in the history of the state. We have reduced the drug payment scheme costs, and we have introduced publicly funded assisted human reduction. Budget 2024 continues the very high level of investment in our public health system by providing for a total allocation of €22.5 billion. And this includes an €808 million increase in core current funding to address the demographic and service pressures that we know are there. I'm also allocating non-core reserves of over €1 billion for COVID and Ukraine spending in the health sector. This will facilitate continued investment in public health measures, including, of course, our successful vaccination programme. It also includes further temporary resources beyond those announced in the summer economic statement to fund the post-pandemic escalation in demand and activity across our acute hospitals through a health resilience fund. The value of this record level of health investment, of course, needs to be fully realised with a focus on productivity, on governance and how we can consolidate our funding capacity. Accordingly, this will be accompanied by a programme of initiatives to improve financial oversight across the health system as part of our reform agenda. This work will be complete by the end of the year. The government remains committed to reducing waiting lists in our hospitals and our community services. And this budget will fund a range of measures to reduce waiting times for inpatient care and improve access to community diagnostics. We will continue our targeted recruitment of additional staff. We'll do this to enhance capacity across a range of acute hospital community settings, as well as our surgical hubs, and we will continue the reform measures to progress the regionalisation of our health service to make it even more responsive to each patient's needs. I'm also ensuring increased supports across our community services through additional funding for mental health services, noting that today is World Mental Health Day. Social inclusion services and older people and the health and our well-being services are therefore so important. €1.23 billion is being provided as part of the National Development Plan for the delivery of additional health infrastructure to enhance the wider sustainability of our health services. So looking to the future, looking again to the role of education, investing in further and higher education, in innovation and in creativity is our future. In 2024, I committed to allocating over €4.1 billion to these sectors, and reflecting their vital role in our economic success, I am providing €60 million to address sustainable funding of higher education as set out in Funding the Future, as well as additional funding for greater capacity in medicine places. I'm also providing additional supports to allow greater access for students already attending third-level education, including increases in the maintenance grant rates, the restoration of maintenance grants to eligible postgraduate students on a similar basis to undergraduates, and improvements to the thresholds for maintenance and student contribution grants from September. In 2024, I am providing €67 million for the craft apprenticeship scheme to over 16,000 places next year. This is to help us do better with regard to our climate challenges. It is to help us do better in building more homes. I also want to turn briefly to the National Training Fund. It plays a vital funding role in how we future-proof the skill needs of the labour market and ensure workers can readily access lifelong learning opportunities. I'm keen to ensure the fund is used in an effective and sustainable way, and it is in surplus because of the combination of increases in employers' PRSI and the number of people at work in our country. At the same time, there are funding needs for higher education, but meeting those needs is always inside the parameters of each budget, and I want to re-examine this to find a better way of meeting those needs. So to that end, officials will bring forward options, including looking at legislative changes for the future operation of the fund, and we will do this because a highly educated workforce creates the investments, creates the ability that we need to support our country and to create an enterprising and a productive economy. And this sector is the linchpin to our economic growth, to our future well-being, to our prosperity. And this is why, as a government, we've invested heavily to protect enterprises through the challenges of Brexit, of COVID, of the consequences of the energy crisis. And the fruits, the consequences of this support can be seen across a range of economic measures, not least the fact that over 2.6 million people now work in Ireland. As I mentioned earlier, a €250 million package of temporary supports will be developed to support these businesses through the current challenges associated with the cost of living. And today, in addition to this, I am allocating an additional €35 million to the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, and this money is in conjunction with the existing resources available to the department to allow them to do the following. €9 million for our local enterprise offices. These are the hubs for enterprise creation, for business startups in local towns and communities. And this money will allow them to extend their supports, to extend their mentoring programmes to a wider cohort of local businesses. €3 million for the Digital Services Coordinator to support enforcement of the Digital Services Act, and an increase in the IDA's capital allocation of €27 million to accelerate its regional property grants programme to ensure balanced regional inward investments. And this is because a better connected, a more regionally balanced Ireland is also at the heart of our National Development Plan. It is a blueprint for building a more sustainable, a more forward-looking country. And today I am providing an additional €900 million in 2024 for essential investment in more schools, in more hospital and better hospital infrastructure, and for better public and road transport. Today also marks the first day since my own department took the mandate on accelerating delivery of the National Development Plan. and that is why I have amended the public works contracts. It's why I've developed new infrastructure guidelines, which will be published in the coming weeks, to ease the administrative burden of approving National Development Plan projects. An independent evaluation of these priorities and the capacity of the National Development Plan will soon inform the delivery of those priorities. This is also why a time-limited fund to accelerate key priority capital projects over the years 2024 to 2026 will also be provided, funded by windfall corporate tax receipts. Minister McGrath has already spoken about how the establishment of long-term savings funds will help with the investment of some of these receipts, which is why the Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund is so important. To protect our investment, to protect our capital expenditure in the event of an economic downturn, enabling continued investment in large projects that drive growth. A further plan, the Climate Action Plan, will deliver positive change for our climate while improving the lives of communities all over Ireland. And accelerating the green transition is the best way of protecting the security of our energy supplies, of breaking our dependency on imports, and protecting our people from fossil fuel price shocks. Ireland is already #1 in the world for the share of electricity demand met by onshore wind. By 2030, in just over 6 years' time, we aim to meet 80% of Irish electricity needs from renewable energy, and this budget provides the funding for the staffing of the agencies to deliver that goal. To help households with the green transition, the budget provides a further €380 million to residential and community energy schemes. It will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and energy bills, meaning households throughout Ireland will be warmer, they will be healthier, while also having more money within their pockets. And within this funding, a record allocation will be made to the Warmer Home Scheme that provides free energy efficiency upgrades to the homes of those who need it the most. Funding will also be provided to accelerate community-based partnerships to deliver energy savings, for solar supports to allow households to profit by selling their energy back to the grid, and a new loan interest loan scheme that will work alongside the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland grants to allow everyone the opportunity to benefit from energy savings. Individual households, schools, farms, local businesses and community enterprises, including sports club and also community halls, are all eligible for support through schemes that have already installed solar panels on 70,000 buildings across the country. Applying an appropriate price to the climate harmful effects of carbon through the carbon tax remains an important measure in how we work together to meet our goals. So today, I'm announcing an additional €165 million of carbon tax revenues to be available in 2024 to support a just transition, to help to address fuel poverty, bringing the total carbon tax revenue available for investment to €788 million, and almost half of this, some €380 million, will be invested in improving the energy efficiency of our homes. In addition, the tax will fund €262 million of social protection spend next year, an additional €44 million of targeted social welfare measures, namely the increases in the qualified child payment, the changes in the income eligibility threshold for the working family payment, all to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected from any unintended impact of this tax increase. An additional €32 million in carbon tax funding will be provided to the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine next year to support up to 50,000 farmers to improve biodiversity, to improve climate, air and water quality. And to continue to cut down on our carbon emissions, the National Development Plan will prioritise investment in sustainable, inactive and accessible transport. Because it is transport that plays a critical role not only in our connectivity but also those climate ambitions. And to that end, the budget will provide €3.5 billion to the Department of Transport, €892 million in current funding and €2.7 billion in capital. The current funding will provide for the continuation of the temporary 20% fare reductions until the end of 2024, the rollout of further services of Bus Connects, of Connecting Ireland and New Town service plans, and the transition to world-class, fuel-efficient maritime and inland aviation rescue services. It will support the construction of Metrolink, the core commuter rail project, and investment in electric and hybrid electric buses and the essential infrastructure that we need for new bus and rail fleets, such as the electrification of depots, as well as €1.35 billion for the development, the protection, the renewal of our roads network. As part of the cost of living package, the eligibility for the young adult card is being extended to cover adults aged 19 to 25. And in addition, I'll be working with the Minister for Transport in respect of further public transport affordability measures targeted at those under 18 with a view to implementation in 2025. This government has invested heavily in walking, in our cycling infrastructure, and it has improved public transport. And we will continue to meet our commitment to invest almost €1 million per day in cycling, in walking infrastructure. And investment in greenways is also envisioned and seen through an all-island lens. So this is why construction on the southern sections of the Carlingford Lough Greenway is due for completion this December, with the Northern Ireland route to be completed in 2024, linking our communities across borders. And this transport infrastructure is just one of the ways in which we keep communities connected. Digital innovation has also allowed our communities to stay connected even when we were physically apart. And the National Broadband Scheme is at the heart of this. The government is keeping its promise to ensure every citizen in Ireland has access to quality high-speed broadband, connecting rural communities, workers and businesses, supporting remote working, online education, and allowing us all to keep in touch with family and friends. The National Broadband Scheme expects to reach 200,000 premises by the end of the year, and next year a further €348 million will be invested to provide another 100,000 homes with the opportunity to connect to fibre broadband. And this means that nobody will be left behind as we move towards a more digitised society at the forefront of global and European technological progress. But of course, as our dependence on these networks increases, so does also the risk of disruption. And the government is determined to protect Irish citizens and their data, as well as digital infrastructure services. So we provide for the continued expansion of the National Cyber Security Centre to strengthen cyber security and resilience, address the cyber skills gap, and develop the cybersecurity industry in Ireland. But all of this means better access to broadband, breathing new life into so many communities. And the funding I am providing for rural and community development in this budget also does this. It supports vibrant, inclusive and sustainable communities across our country. The budget provision of €431 million for this department provides over €205 million for rural development and over €220 million for community development. It will support investment in regional, rural and local communities in our islands and may initiatives to support social inclusion. In addition to this funding, I am providing a targeted social inclusion support of €11 million to provide assistance to new arrivals through the Social Inclusion and Community Activation Programme, and I'm also providing €10 million to projects approved under the Community Recognition Fund, which acknowledges the contribution of so many communities in welcoming and hosting arrivals from Ukraine and from other countries. And all of this is done with the aim of promoting social cohesion and in supporting the development of communities throughout our country. Agriculture and farming households are, of course, at the heart of our rural communities. They play a crucial role in supporting our economy, protecting our landscape and enhancing our environment and producing world-class food. It's an important driver of our rural economy, which is why I am allocating €1.9 billion for the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine to broaden the rollout of the nearly €10 billion CAP strategic plan to 2027. Over €700 million has been provided in 2024 for farmers participating in agri-environmental schemes, including through the Agri-Climate Rural Environment Scheme, Areas of Natural Constraint Scheme, forestry, organic farming and other agri-environmental schemes. And in addition to this, the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine will be administering over €1.2 billion of EU funding in direct payment to farmers. The budget today provides €1.17 billion for the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media. The allocation will support enterprise and employment in our tourism sector, also through targeted measures to support businesses impacted as a result of the war in Ukraine, to support our creative arts sector, fund our national cultural institutions and support our audiovisual industry, to support Irish as a living language. And also, as we all know, recent weeks have reminded us all of the inspirational potential of sport. And this is why this budget will promote the contribution of sport to a healthier, to a more active society and promote the increasing participation of women in sport and invest in our sporting infrastructure. And we will continue to invest in our Irish language broadcasting. And as we plan for a better future for the people of this country, I recognise it's essential that people who live here not only are safe in their communities, but they feel safe. This is why I'm committing a package of €172 million in 2024 for the justice sector to enable continued investment in existing services. I'm pleased to announce funding for recruitment next year of 1,000 Gardaí and up to 250 Garda civilian staff in specialist roles to free up more Gardaí for frontline duties, and in addition, an additional €25 million in the annual overtime budget will mean the Gardaí can be deployed as needed to tackle crime, to tackle antisocial behaviour, leading to stronger, high-visibility policing in our cities, our towns and our communities. And this budget will provide for additional staffing in our court service, our prison services, the Data Protection Commission and Policing Authority, as well as an increase in a range of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence initiatives and an extension of the youth diversion programme throughout the state. Staying with our safety and with security, and in recognition of the continuing reform, the continuing importance of the defence sector, I'm announcing an allocation of €1.23 billion for the Department of Defence. This includes additional current expenditure of €21 million, an additional €34 million in capital expenditure compared to their original plan, to further progress the priority recommendations of the Commission on Defence Forces and the Independent Review Group, as well as funding the first year of the Tribunal of Inquiry. And we will do all of this because increasing our permanent Defence Force numbers is key to building capacity and further progressing the reform programme which is underway. And this allocation will provide for the recruitment, the training, the support of a net additional 400 military personnel next year, as well as posts across the Department of Defence and our Defence Forces to implement reform and important roles such as cyber responders and data and cyber analysts. So this recognises the vital work of our defence forces here at home and abroad. And this is also because we play such a proud role in world affairs. We're known for our contribution to global peace. In 2023, Ireland provided the highest ever level of official development assistance in cash terms and as a percentage of our gross national income. I'm proud we have met the twin challenges of providing for war refugees without losing sight of other crises, including the drought in the Horn of Africa and the awful floods in Pakistan. So in 2024, I am providing €776.5 million in funding to Irish Aid in the Department of Foreign Affairs, which is an 8.4% increase in the level of funding last year, allowing this to reach a record level. We'll also provide at least half of the additional funding necessary to achieve the Government's 2025 Climate Finance Pledge. Supported by European Union funding, the Global Ireland Strategy supports the development of our country at home as well as our values elsewhere. Last month, I attended the launch of a new round of Peace Plus funding supported by the European Union and agreed with the United Kingdom. To support this work, €1.1 billion will be invested in projects that support shared peace and prosperity across Northern Ireland and our border counties, and the Government has to date allocated €247 million of our own Shared Ireland initiative. And we recognise that half a century as a proud member of the European Union has been transformative for Ireland and its people. Our interests are best served by active, engaged membership, and recent years have highlighted the importance of solidarity with our European family. The €1 billion of funding reserved for Ireland from the Brexit Adjustment Reserve is the largest single allocation for any member state. It continues to help with the consequences of Brexit. The Recovery and Resilience Facility, under which Ireland is set to almost receive €1 billion in EU funding up to 2026, supports us in mitigating the effects of COVID, as well as allowing us to continue on a path of a greener and more digital recovery. Repower EU funding will also help accelerate our green transition, and cohesion funding continues to play a vital role in our efforts. So, Ceann Comhairle, budget reform remains central to public expenditure management. It's a key part of the department of my work. Performance, equality, green and wellbeing budgeting, along with the spending review, are examples of how this work will be done, and the paper on the wellbeing impacts of this budget will follow shortly. Our public servants are key to this work in meeting the needs of our growing and changing population, enabling this reform, and the current public service agreement, Building Momentum, expires at the end of this year. Later this year, my department will enter talks. We'll endeavour to reach an agreement that's fair for public servants and affordable for taxpayers. And of course, I would expect that the significant package of cost of living and taxation measures provided for in this budget, which will also benefit public servants, would also be factored into those discussions. And we'll enter into these discussions in a world that continues to change, and to change quickly. We know of the opportunities that this change brings, particularly for an economy that is so skilled, that is so entrepreneurial, in a country that is open and committed to our role in the European Union and in the international community. But we also know of the challenges. We know of the risks too. The existential risk of climate change, the threat of violence, and to the rule of law around the world. And in my introduction today, I acknowledged how all recent budgets were defined by those challenges. At any one of those challenges, at other points in our history, could have caused such long-lasting harm to our economy. But this has not happened. This is because our public finances were gradually, step by difficult step, returned to health, from deficit to balance to surplus. And this budget, presented by Minister McGrath and I today, continues that approach. Not spending every cent today, leaving some aside for tomorrow. Helping with the cost of living, but changing that help as inflation slows. Spending more on public services, on building more homes, more schools and better public transport, but not basing that spending on money we may not always have. This is why this budget will help with the cost of living, will help with better public services and will give more children a better start in life, and that is why I commend Budget 2024 to the House.
Ich habe das schon will. Just no me the one. Moshe the hell. Thank you. And ich habe mit Bugger Riley schon pain. Ich habe the pair started.
And the number one issue facing workers and families is the housing crisis. It permeates every facet of Irish life. Young people left without hope, children growing up in emergency accommodation, businesses who can't get workers, schools who can't get teachers, guards, nurses, members of our defence forces leaving their profession because they can't find somewhere to live. And this should have been a budget to resolve the housing crisis. But today, Minister McGrath and Minister Donohoe have failed in that regard. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil have caused the housing crisis, and today's budget is further confirmation that they are not the ones to fix it. We needed a budget for renters, instead we got a budget for landlords. A Sinn Féin government would have introduced a budget that would have got to grips with the housing crisis and built the homes that our people so desperately need. Access to healthcare, Iascaigh Comhairle, is one of the most fundamental needs of any citizen. Knowing that your child will be able to receive critical surgeries or mental health services when and if they need it. Having confidence that a loved one will be treated with dignity. But that's not the Ireland that we live in today. Instead, we have an Ireland where young and old are waiting hours upon hours to be admitted to our hospitals in emergency departments. An Ireland where many of them are consigned to trolleys on the hospital corridor. An Ireland where our children are forced to wait years for critical spinal surgery with devastating consequences. An Ireland where a child was forced to wait for 5 years, in which time her spine contorted by more than 90 degrees, leaving her in pain and sometimes unable to breathe. And Iascaigh Comhairle, any modern society will be judged on its ability to deliver on these very most basic needs. And has there ever been a point in the history of the state when a minister celebrates billions of additional euros in the state's coffers when so many children are condemned to homelessness or forced to wait for years for critical surgery? And the question I ask, is that the society we want to build? Because today's budget offers no more hope to these children than they had yesterday. It has failed them again. A budget is about setting out a path for the future. It's about setting a vision of our values, a vision and values that are about compassion, that are about dignity and respect. And this government and this budget needs to be judged on that basis. And on that basis, it has clearly failed. Becheartgur ken ashnish a bhíon a horu an ggéirchim tíhiachta. Ac an nniu hipper an are McGrath agus Donohoe. Gur be Fianna Fáil agus Fine Gael ba cúislis an ggéirchim tíhiachta agus teisig an lig na dhéadsan a bhfuil an ggéirchim seo a réite. Tá muid an gcónaí an éar in the new, and the bhfuil óchar is cin seart mo chuig bíon the éisic fanart, so it's like cir a bhuair jig in our hospital a geirí fanart forista in Japa agus dhéadach fanart in our rana éigandala. The housing crisis is the government's greatest failure, and ending the housing crisis is Sinn Féin's #1 priority. Delivering the biggest public housing programme in the history of the state is Sinn Féin's #1 priority, and it needed to be the #1 priority of this budget. But under this government, entire generations have been locked out of home ownership. More than 2/3 of our young people are forced to live with their parents, and more of them are reaching the conclusion that their future is not here but elsewhere. Home ownership is falling under this government. House prices are rising, rents are spiralling out of control, and the level of homelessness has broken all new records month after month. And what an indictment on this government, which has billions of euros at its disposal, that nearly 4,000 children woke up this morning in emergency accommodation. And can any one of us here really imagine what that is like? A child not being able to invite a playmate over to their home because their home is a hotel room or a B&B. What it's like for a parent wondering what they have done wrong, that they are raising their children in these conditions. But they have done nothing wrong. It is the government who have wronged them, and shame on you for not changing course and setting a path to make things right in this budget. Because the reality is, you have normalised child homelessness, and that should never be accepted in this state. Is this the society we want to be? It is not. Ministers, you have been in government, as Minister Donohoe said, for just over 3 years now. But let's look at your record in relation to housing. Since taking office, the average rents have increased by 33%. What does that mean? It means the average renter is paying $5,000 more in rent every single year since you took office just over 3 years ago. Those who want to buy a house have seen the house prices increase since you took office 3 years ago by €60,000. God forbid you live in Wicklow, because it went up by €90,000 there, or €70,000 in Kildare. That's the record of your government. And the Minister for Housing has said that the government has turned a corner on the issue of housing. Well, what planet is he living on? Because he's certainly not living on this one. Is he in Gearchem Tiachta and Chippus Motic in Rialtas? Agus horu Sinn Féin túsachet on Gearchem Tiachta, Fyn Rialtas shot in the glunta dini, a bit na me chance aku a good tihe a yield, no a kisu, agus Lerian and Canash na shaw, na will plan egin Rialtas fios a har or seal na dini. The government's abject failure to deliver affordable homes to buy and to reduce rents is crushing the living standards of ordinary people, and it's punishing those so desperate to build for the future. And the government and the minister over there has missed every single target that he has set on affordable housing. Every single one of them he has missed year after year since taking office. But what's more fundamental is that the plan that underpins this budget and the targets, even if they were reached, are doomed to fail. And we know that, and you know that, and everybody knows that. These targets are universally acknowledged as being too low. So what's the government done in this budget to respond to all of that today? You didn't increase the targets at all. Not one additional home are you planning to build of what you've already set out. Not one additional home. There's no ramp up in housing under this budget. Last year, in 2023, you allocated €2.6 billion to the capital housing programme. This year, you allocate the same amount of money. No increased investment, no increased urgency. It is in the middle of a housing crisis, Minister. It is shameful. You couldn't make this up, that you have decided not even to ramp up housing delivery what you have up before what you've planned.
You can't do it. Not able.
It is a clear message, if there ever was one, to workers and families that under this government, in terms of housing, things will not get better. Indeed, they will get worse. And Sinn Féin have pointed out a plan. We said very clearly what should have been in this budget is the biggest state-supported construction of social, affordable and cost rental houses in the history of the state, delivering 21,000 public homes next year. That is what's needed. That's the ambition. That's the scale of the crisis, but you've failed to meet that. Increasing the supply of affordable homes to rent and to buy. For many years, Sinn Féin have also called for the introduction of a refundable tax credit to put 1 month's rent back into renters' pockets. And for this to be introduced, crucially, alongside a 3-year ban on rent increases. For years, this proposal was criticised time and time again by government, by minister. And last year you performed an embarrassing U-turn and introduced a botched tax credit which more than half of renters have not even received. But even in rent pressure zones, rents are increasing more than the increase in the tax credit. And you know this. And if you live outside of the rent pressure zone, then God help you, because they're increasing it by multiples of that. So without a ban on rent increases, the Minister, you may as well have written the cheque yourself and stuffed it into the pockets of the landlords, because that is where it is going to end up. A direct transfer of money into the pockets of landlords. And they're not my words. They're the words of the minister sitting next to you. They're the words of Paschal Donohoe last year. You simply do not get it. If you don't freeze, if you do not ban rent increases, then what you're doing is transferring this money from the state into the pockets of landlords. But not content with writing one cheque for landlords, the government have decided to write them another one by giving them a tax break of €600 next year at a cost of €160 million. But you even go further than that, Minister. You increase this tax break for landlords year after year until it reaches €1,000 by 2027. How much is that going to cost? €270 million to landlords. You shake your head. The tax paper that you published shows the full year cost of this €160 million, Minister. You may be embarrassed that that's what you're doing, but let's call it for what it is. You've decided to put money, taxpayers' monies, into the pockets of landlords. And you couldn't make this up. You simply couldn't make this up. In this budget, this government has provided nearly twice as much to landlords as it has to struggling renters. Yeah. Now, you know fine well, because your experts in your department told you that the vast majority of these landlords never ever thought about leaving the rental market. And this SOP to landlords will go down as one of the most stupidest tax reliefs ever to be provided by a Minister for Finance in recent times. It is shameful that what you're doing with public money in this regard. But don't take my word for it. Listen to what your experts have said in the Department of Finance. Your own department made it clear this summer that tax is not the reason why landlords choose to sell their properties. The tax strategy papers are published for us all to see. The department also warned that personal rates of income tax have always applied to rental income, and any favourable treatment to this income would raise legitimate questions around social equity. But we know what side you have. You're always on the side of the landlords. So it is for the government to explain. Why is it, Minister? It's a legitimate question. Why should a nurse be taxed more than a landlord? Because that's what you've done in your proposal today, and it's shameful. It is absolutely wrong, and the worst thing is, it's not even going to work, and if you listen to your own department, they would have told you that. Today's budget is a grim news for renters and aspiring home buyers, but what is most shocking is that the government have announced a housing budget which they themselves know falls very far short of the needs of our people. This budget is a further confirmation, if ever we need it, and it's something that we have known for some time, that this government has given up on housing. It is clear that only a Sinn Féin government can deliver the type of change that we need, deliver the type of homes that our people need, and deliver the type of energy and determination to cut through the red tape that is needed to deliver and end the crisis that has been created by these two parties opposite. Yeah. For too long, under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, our health service lunged from crisis to crisis. Overcrowding in our hospitals is out of control, and waiting lists continue to go up. And our young doctors and nurses are looking abroad. And in this budget, you've given them no reason to stay at home and plenty of reasons to leave, because they can't afford a home. They can't provide the quality of care that they were trained to deliver because of the conditions in which they're forced to work in. And let's turn to the state of our hospitals. Over the recent period, the number of patients in accident and emergency departments has broken all records and represents a damning indictment of the government's lack of planning in respect of this crisis. It lacks urgency. It lacks prioritisation that has caused significant distress to many patients and to families. Now, Minister, they're not my words. They're the words of your party leader, Micheál Martin, in 2018. Well, what's happened since? Since you took office? Well, in January you broke new records. 931 patients languishing on trolleys in a single morning. And since then, the Minister for Health has set a new target, that no more than 350 patients will languish on a trolley on any given day. Minister, a decade ago, 350 patients on trolleys in corridors in our hospitals was a national scandal. Today it is a government target. How shameful. That's the ambition that the government have. It is now a target. There are 710,000 people waiting just to get a date for a hospital appointment. 40,000 more of them since you took office 3.5 years ago. 250,000 people waiting for a diagnostic scan. And there are patients with cancer, children with scoliosis, older people with broken bones, and they're told to wait and wait again. And the same applies to children's mental health and children's disability services. Waiting lists for children have more than doubled since this government took office. More than 15,000 children are waiting for first contact with their specialist disability team. On the other end of the scale, we have 6,000 older people who have been approved for home help but have been left waiting with no help. And the same challenge are faced with people with disability. In every section of our society, from young to old, for people with disabilities to mental health issues, it is clear that our health service is going in the wrong direction. So what do we have in the budget, given all of those facts, given all of the fact that it is going in the wrong direction since this government took office? What has this budget done? It's done next to nothing. There is very little in this budget that will give any comfort to patients or parents who are struggling to get access to basic health and basic care services. No urgency, no vision, no compassion. And that's the reality. You've just decided to forget about health. You've failed time and time again to invest in the workforce and to plan for the future. And today the government boasts about record tax revenues. Yet you've delivered a standstill budget for health. There is no new funding for additional hospital beds. There's less capital investment than was promised in the National Development Plan for health. In fact, the health capital budget wouldn't even keep pace with inflation. It's real-time cuts that is actually happening to health service, which is a crying out for investment. And you have decided this at Cabinet in all consciousness, despite the resources that we have of the state, to actually leave the health system that is breaking at the seams as bad this year, as bad next year as it is this year. And indeed, it's probably going to be worse, because the real reality is you have underfunded for ELS. The standstill budget isn't even enough to keep pace with what is happening. And what does that tell us? It tells us that government have decided very clearly that they've thrown in the towel on health, that they don't have any vision, that they have nothing to offer anymore. They have nothing to offer in terms of improving the conditions faced by healthcare workers or indeed the patients, or indeed they have no interest. Ten service flinch ag foliage faoin rialta seo, agus ní féidir le áthar leapatha in their hospital a eil, agus tá poisig fan bliantaí le hé ábridí criticale, agus is only doctor agus altra a teag foigal, agus is léir go bhfuil in rialta seo tar éis idias and service flinch. For Sinn Féin, improving access to healthcare and reducing its costs is a key priority. And we've proposed a major investment in healthcare in terms of our plan, to roll out 1,800 additional beds over the next 3 years, to invest in modern diagnostic equipment and fit-for-purpose CAMS units that support children, their families, and treat them with dignity and with respect, and to reduce medical costs. And also extend medical cards to an additional 400,000 citizens and abolish prescription charges. You could have done that, but you've decided not to. But the difference is we in Sinn Féin have an ambition. We have an ambition for our health service, and instead the government has thrown in the towel. You've given up on patients and you've given up on our healthcare staff. In the past year, more and more workers and families have struggled under the cost of living. The high cost of living has impacted every corner of our society, young and old. And those working hard to pay the rent or to make their monthly mortgage payment have felt it hard. Citizens with disability have felt it really hard, as have many others. Energy bills remain too high. Food prices and fuel costs have shot up. And instead of moving forward, far too many people believe that they're moving backwards. Le brisig bliananis ta ebrani agus chaili following the work costas moraltala. An anion and rud carta yena de pain agus the chaili ten realtas igligan shisiat. In the past year, Minister, you know that mortgage costs have soared. According to the Central Bank, 2 out of every 5 households will have seen their annual mortgage costs increase by more than €3,000. 1 in 5 households will have seen their mortgage costs increase by a staggering €5,700. And mortgage prisoners who have had their loans sold to vulture funds, sales that both ministers opposite me actually facilitated, have felt it really, really hard, as they have seen letter after letter fall through the letterbox, one after another, telling them that another punishing interest rate hike is on the way. And for months now, Sinn Féin have put forward a clear plan to help workers and families with the soaring cost of mortgage costs, with temporary and target mortgage interest relief. And for months, the government opposed it over and over again at every single turn, including the Minister for Finance. You opposed it right up until recently. who yourself argued for 100% mortgage interest relief, didn't you? 100% mortgage interest relief. You're Minister for Finance today, and you provide 20%. And at the time you were arguing for 100% mortgage interest relief in 2016, the ECB's interest rate was 0. It's never been the highest in the history of the state. And you've dithered and dathered and you've delayed. And even now, after the announcement, we find out that people won't even be able to benefit from this till 2024. But instead of implementing the plan that we put forward for many, many months now, the government decided to implement a scheme which appears to lock out tens of thousands of households who've seen their mortgage costs go through the roof. And there's no rationale why you would do this, Minister. None whatsoever. Like, the idea that you were scrambling at the last minute trying to put a plan together of how to do this is just ridiculous. We've been raising this since December of last year. You've had plenty of time to design this measure, and you've decided consciously to lock out tens of thousands of people who've seen their mortgage interest rate rise. Mortgage interest relief that this government has proposed will not be available to households who have an outstanding mortgage balance beneath €80,000. Do you know that somebody like on €75,000, if they've been on a tracker rate or if they're with the vultures, that they will have seen their interest rate increase by nearly €2,000 in the last year, and you're deciding to do nothing for them? Some of these individuals are older people. They've started to pay down their mortgage, and you've decided to lock them out. There is no rationale whatsoever to do this. So what do you say to the person who's looking in today, who've seen their interest rates increase on 10 separate occasions since July of last year? They're paying €2,000 more than they were last year, but because their outstanding loan is less than €80,000, the Minister for Finance, the Minister for Public Expenditure and the government have basically saying, you're on your own, we're not supporting you. That's shameful. It's absolutely shameful and has to be dealt with in the finance bill. And again, it's a testament of how this government takes a good idea from Sinn Féin and decides to make a mess of it. What you should do, and what we've told you since last year, is you should provide mortgage interest relief up to €1,500, absorbing 30% of the interest that has been increased since last year, and that should be available to everybody who have seen their interest rates increase. There's a way of doing it. Let's not mess it up. Let's not try and be different just because we came up with the idea. You've made the U-turn, you've acknowledged that we're right, and let's now get this policy right and support individuals. Workers and families continue to spend too much on heating their homes and keeping the lights on. And in the past several months, wholesale prices have fallen sharply. And while electricity prices for households have fallen across Europe, Irish electricity prices remain unacceptably high, and Sinn Féin has been clear. In government, we would provide the power to the energy regulator to stamp out anti-competitive behaviour and regulated standing charges. And we would force the hand of energy companies by setting a price cap above which they could not charge consumers, reducing energy bills for households at a time of crisis. In March, the Taoiseach promised to take action against energy companies that failed to pass on reduced costs to struggling households. No action was taken. Instead, the government have allowed energy companies to continue to fleece households with unaffordable bills. Sinn Féin put the high cost of childcare on the political agenda back in the election of 2020. We did it by committing to cut childcare fees by 2/3. But what the government has announced today is that too little, too late. It's a 25% reduction, but people will not get it until September of next year. People need to see reductions now, and there should be no delay until September. We need to see these bills coming down from January, and I would urge the government to actually again heed Sinn Féin's call and to reduce these costs by 2/3 in total, 55% next year, as we have planned. Even before the spike in energy prices and inflation, more and more workers' hard-earned money was being spent on extortionate childcare fees, rents and energy bills. And we are one of the most expensive places to live in Europe for some time. In recent years, half of all households have seen their incomes fall or stagnate, and despite doing everything right and working hard, the economy hasn't been working for them. We in Sinn Féin have said for some time that the fairest way to reduce taxes and put money back into workers' pockets is through cuts to the USC, and this budget needed to deliver a fair tax package. In 2020, we stated our intention to remove the first €30,000 that a worker earns from the USC tax net, and we will deliver on that if we get an opportunity in government. The road that could have been started today is that road, by abolishing the first rate of USC, by slashing the second rate of USC in half and increasing the point at which the third rate of USC is applied. That is what Sinn Féin has proposed. Instead, what we have is what the government have announced, and the most expensive element of that today's tax package is a €2,000 increase in the standard rate band, which well over half of workers will not benefit from. The package will see a worker earning €35,000 benefit from €320, while someone on €200,000 will benefit from €890, and that isn't a fair tax package in anybody's books. We also know that the rise in fuel prices has added further financial strain to households across the state. In September, the government increased the price of petrol and diesel with a tax hike, and tomorrow, at midnight tonight, you will push ahead with another tax hike, pushing up the price of petrol further. We will place an amendment later on tonight to try and stop that price hike going ahead. Because, Minister, where I come from, and I think this is what the government fails to understand, that in many parts of Ireland, driving a car is not a luxury. Driving a car is a necessity. It is how you get your kids to school. It is how you travel to work. It is how you make your way to the hospital appointment, because rural transport or affordable or accessible public transport doesn't exist in many of these communities. Yet the government are hell-bent to continue to increase the price of petrol and diesel through further increases in carbon taxes at midnight tonight and again next year. Again, not content with that, you will again increase other fuel, as we see in this budget. In May of next year, you're going to increase the cost of home heating oil, where more than a third of households rely on that heat to heat their homes. But, Minister, the first test of a republic is how we protect the most vulnerable. And the decision to increase payments for citizens with disabilities by only €12, given the high cost of disability, which everyone seems to recognise apart from the government, is unacceptable. What should have been provided, and what Sinn Féin would have provided, is a €20 weekly increase in the rate of disability-related payments. The qualified child payment to the poorest children will be increased by only €4 per week. Sinn Féin would have increased it by €5 for the under-12s and €10 for the over-12s. But you also unveiled to increase child benefit, Minister. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have both cut child benefit in the past, and to this very day, child benefit payment remains less than what it was in 2008. So the government are neglecting children, and child poverty will deepen as a result. Our economy has faced significant headwinds in recent years, from the pandemic to an energy shock. In the past year, we faced emerging and interrelated headwinds, high levels of inflation and a tightening monetary policy. And these challenges have placed significant pressure on households and businesses. Rising interest rates pose a risk to future investment and infrastructure delivery, and most crucially in the areas of housing, and that will require a greater state response. The growing threat of climate breakdown and our duty to transition to a low-carbon economy poses challenges and opportunities to our society and the wider economy. But despite all the rhetoric, the government is failing on climate action. At the beginning of this year, we had the highest rate in greenhouse gas emissions in the EU. And under this government, our emissions are increasing. And this is a perfect example of all the government bluster, all talk but no action. And what's been announced today? To provide alternatives to households? Well, we have a meagre increase in the budget for residential and community retrofits, and we will remain with a retrofitting scheme that is only available to you if you have €25,000 lying about in a bank account which you can afford to spend, locking out low and middle income households from support where they are hit with further carbon tax hikes. So we can do much better, and Sinn Féin outlined how we can do better in terms of climate. We have proposed an additional €500 million to expand retrofitting, making it accessible to low and middle income households, to reduce transport costs and accelerate our transition to renewable energy. Today, the government announced an increase in the research and development tax credit, and I welcome that, because for Sinn Féin, we've been calling for this for years, for the R&D tax credit to be increased to 30%, to simplify the application process and support SMEs, and to provide tax credits to Irish start-ups in the one instalment in the first year, to drive innovation among Irish start-ups and firms. Next year, the domestic economy is expected to grow by 2%. The ultimate task is to convert economic gains into increasing living standards for our people. For too many, the government is failing that task. Tax revenues has grown and will continue to grow over the next year. A key driver of revenue growth in recent years has been due to corporation tax. And we know a significant amount of this revenue is highly concentrated and comes from a small number of foreign-owned multinationals. And as such, a future course of this revenue is uncertain. Next year will also see the implementation of the OECD tax agreement for the digital age, which Sinn Féin supports, and we will scrutinise the legislation underpinning this agreement in the coming weeks. Today, the Government have stated their intention to create two separate funds, and Sinn Féin supports the principle of establishing a fund to increase and support public investment in the years ahead. But while it's important to keep an eye on the future challenges, we can't lose sight of the problems our people and our economy face here and now. As the tax take of the state bulges, with surpluses worth billions of euros in the years ahead, we have a unique opportunity to tackle the housing crisis and the infrastructure deficits that harm living standards and that undermine our economy. And this budget was a squandered opportunity in that regard. Tesla mo machantar hain and gear kim sa gaeltar, to don dara daina ruinish as a kila to lina gancheri luhiwal tarish chichim agus niel a chaila awareness and quicker togal clonia trigelic. A Cawulin scheme Lord na Gaelic Yal and Tara O'Donovan. Cawulin Muni Brisha Hastin do Udres na Gaeltarte. O Planal Changa Gajin the Kalashi Sauri at a Gruaches a Gashriha Fagate and Reti eg Taresh Iriaso via Vilis Arjagon. Nirilish and Realta Shaw few is quick million Brisha or her fuel a draw na Gaelic agus e Jerry or Skeman to Muit and Gaeltart. Horushin Fain. 2 million brisje, 1 million jeeg brisje se budget malarte don Gaeltart a Wayne, 10 million brisje don Gaelic, agus 10 million in Shin .tg car, Mark which have more hashier doing. This budget needed to make life more affordable for our people. It needed to reduce the cost of living. It needed to accelerate the delivery of affordable homes, to tackle overcrowding and unacceptable waiting lists in our health service, to use this opportunity to deliver lasting change and better living standards for our people. In the time to come, this budget will be remembered as one which wasted that opportunity. It bears the hallmarks of a government that is out of touch, out of ideas and out of time.
Laskin Corla, never has it taken so long for government ministers to say so little of significance. The budget the ministers outline has a wider context than this budget, international events and economic forces beyond their control. But there's another context for this budget, a context that they are responsible for. This is the years of government failing to address the biggest issues that people are facing. One of the ministers said earlier, these policies did not happen by accident, and they are absolutely right. Their policies have constructed the crisis in housing and in health and many other areas. The cost of living pressures have become entrenched. They have had 13 long years, yet they have failed to deliver for ordinary workers and families. People are suffering the brunt of the inadequate investment in housing, in health, in essential services and in vital infrastructure. While this budget may help some, it will not bring the change that people are demanding. The word continue was used over and over and over again. This is yet another backslapping budget from the government. Fair play to ourselves. There are two tiers to this economy. Macroeconomic headlines mean nothing to people who are struggling to keep their heads above water. Today, as we sit around this chamber, there are 785,000 people living below the poverty line. After housing costs, 1 in 5 people are existing, not living in poverty. They include renters, lone parents and children, and adults with disabilities. Almost half of all renters are at risk of poverty. 1 out of every 2 lone parents are at risk of poverty. 14% are living in consistent poverty. Half of all people living with a disability are at risk of poverty. This state has the lowest employment rate of people with a disability in Europe. Why? Because the barriers to employment for people with disabilities have never, ever been tackled. This government are economically short-sighted. They have failed on the biggest challenges we face in housing, health and cost of living. Not only have a generation been forced into a life of renting, this government has turned the state itself into a renter. Private companies are being given more and more control of our public services. Outsourcing, private consultants and leasing contracts are siphoning off vast amounts of public money. Private companies will now own 90% of all primary care centres, with the state just being a tenant. We're paying $20 million a year in rent. It costs more in the long run, and the site and the building will never ever be owned by the state, and leaves future health budgets in the hands of developers and landlords. They're doing the same thing in third-level education, controversial public-private partnerships for technological universities, developer-led, with the government paying for 25 years for the right to use the building. The European Court of Auditors criticised this as bad value for money, but the government chooses to ignore these warnings, pushing ahead despite the long-term impact on public finances. There are 40,000 civil servants, 900,000 square metres of office space. The government chooses to rent 40% of this office space. This is despite a government report stating that it's 30 to 40% cheaper to buy office space, and still they choose to continue to rent. Why are we expanding in all these areas when we have the money to do things properly? This is an obvious step that the government could take to reduce costs in the medium term. We need a government that thinks and plans beyond the annual budget. Huge costs are associated with the failure to deliver social and affordable housing. I'm reminded of Minister Donohoe's first budget speech. It came in 2016, after 5 years of Fine Gael in government. Since then, obviously, we've had 7 more years of Fine Gael and 7 more budget speeches. Addressing this chamber that day, he said, housing was a core priority. A core priority. He went on to say that 47,000 new social housing units will be delivered by 2021. The truth is, housing has never been a Fine Gael priority, and we see from today's budget it is still not a priority. We know that because only a small fraction of those houses were ever delivered. Had they kept their word, people wouldn't be locked out of home ownership. Rents wouldn't have skyrocketed. The number of people homeless wouldn't have doubled. As we sit here today, looking at all of the seats in this chamber, we should remember the number of children without a place to call home today or tonight could fill this chamber 25 times over. And you say that this country is one of the best places on earth to be a child. Well, tell that to those children. And that doesn't even count those that are crammed into rooms with relatives. Could you imagine what it's like to be the parents of those children? More than twice the number of children homeless today than when that budget speech was given. More than twice as many as when we were told that housing was a priority for Fine Gael. Hundreds of thousands of other lives have been put on hold. 2 out of 3 people under 30 are living with their parents. It's hard to believe in a country as rich as ours that there are 522,000 adults living with their parents, up substantially since 2016, and one of the highest rates in Europe. Most of them are in employment, but a job no longer means you can afford somewhere to live, somewhere to start a family. This budget tells me that this government cannot and will not get to grips with the housing crisis. There is no increase in their targets, and their targets are universally seen as too low. Sinn Féin would deliver 21,000 social and affordable homes. There's a scale of investment that is needed, the sense of urgency that is needed. We have seen the opportunity to make lasting difference in people's lives by addressing housing. People need a government that is willing to stand up for them. Ending the housing crisis is Sinn Féin's #1 priority. Then we look at health. You've not only seen a deepening crisis in housing, you have overseen a deepening crisis in health. In Minister Donohoe's same speech in 2016, he said health was also a core priority. As of this summer, there are more than 880,000 patients on hospital waiting lists, almost 1 million people. That is double the number in 2016, when health became a Fine Gael core priority. How can anyone trust this government to deliver? Hospitals are operating at dangerously unsafe levels. They broke a new record, as Pierre said, on Tuesday, the 3rd of January 2023, with 931 patients left on trolleys. It is heartbreaking to see average waiting times in some hospitals reaching over 27 hours. I struggle to imagine the hardship and the turmoil that must cause patients, families and the staff. In a letter to government this week, 78 Donegal GPs wrote, "We cannot continue to sit back and watch our patients wait for hours in ambulances at the door of emergency departments or on hard chairs waiting for treatments. That is what you have done. Is it any wonder that 9,000 people every month leave emergency departments without even being seen? Again, more than twice as many than in 2016, leaving without emergency care. Staff are at breaking point as conditions continue to deteriorate. And it's not just in our hospitals. The failure of successive Fine Gael governments and Fianna Fáil governments permeates deep into community health care. Dental care for the least well-off in our society is collapsing. Access to timely GP is no longer guaranteed in many communities. There's a severe lack of community beds. Nursing homes are struggling to stay open. The lack of investment in mental health has destroyed lives and wrecked families. Nowhere is the change more badly needed. For too long under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, our health service has lurched from crisis to crisis. Patients and healthcare staff deserve better. You've brought forward a budget with essentially no new measures. 100 million in a budget the size of health will have no impact whatsoever. When I listened to the Minister's speeches, I thought, this government has thrown in the towel on health. Sinn Féin would invest in health services. We've seen the alarming rise of poverty amongst older people and people with disabilities. One of the burdens is the cost of healthcare and medicine. Sinn Féin would reduce the maximum monthly drugs payment to €50, abolishing prescription charges and extending medical cards to 400,000 additional people. This would take some pressure off people and be a step in the right direction to universal health care. Every year under Fine Gael, people have to travel further and wait longer to access health care. Sinn Féin has a multi-year plan to fix the health service, starting with €1.3 billion investment in capacity, in workforce planning and in cutting the cost of health care. People living with disabilities and parents of children with disabilities have been let down again by this government over and over again, who continue to deny their basic human rights. They have to fight each and every day for access to the very most basic services. The Disability Action Plan agreed in July of this year is already in jeopardy. The 55 million outlined in the budget goes nowhere near far enough to make that plan viable. And I'm really mindful here today that there are parents of children who have been impacted by sodium valproate, and they are still waiting for a pathway to care. These children have been harmed and they still don't have the pathway to care that they need. It's unacceptable that government has failed to provide adequate and appropriate residential care, that so many people remain in unsuitable congregated settings. Why are there young people with disabilities living in nursing homes? Elderly parents of children with disabilities need to know that there is an agreed care plan for their children. Government is failing to provide enough adult day services, respite services and home care packages, pushing carers to breaking point and leaving them in financial stress. Sinn Féin would invest over €140 million to deliver the Disability Action Plan. We need to ensure that people with disabilities are not further harmed by the cost of living crisis. The fact is that people are already in arrears and don't have enough to make it through the winter. Sinn Féin recognises that we are in a cost of living crisis, a crisis that is deep-rooted, that cannot be fixed with one-off measures alone. Not to have to wait until budget day to know how difficult the winter is going to be. Every year a Christmas bonus is announced as if it's some type of a gift. People who rely on state pensions, disability payments or any other payments deserve certainty. Many are still struggling to get by, but that's why Sinn Féin set out a proposal to invest €1.7 billion in social protection. We would increase child benefit. Sinn Féin would really address child poverty. Poverty among retired people has also been increasing in recent years. This is an alarming trend. An increase in pensions alone will not tackle the consistent poverty faced by some. More targeted increases to the living alone allowance and to the fuel allowance is required. This must also be combined with a plan to ensure older people have secure housing. Sinn Féin would also target greater support to children and families. The 7 million allocated by the government for capitation for schools is shocking. Schools are struggling with increased costs. This will continue to push the cost on to parents, even through the so-called voluntary contributions. There is nothing here on student accommodation. There are thousands of student beds that could be unlocked as if they were serious about addressing the annual crisis in student accommodation. That's why we allocated in the alternative budget 100 million capital to unlock all of those projects. The Students' Union told you last week that accommodation hasn't been provided. This 100 million is good for students and for parents and would take the pressure off the private rental market. Finally, the government has been persuaded and pushed into acting on childcare. Despite the government commitment, parents will be forced to wait until September 2024 to see any reduction in their fees. Since 2017, our spokesperson on children, Kathleen Funchion, has fought hard to convince the government of the need and the importance of investing in childcare. Now we urgently request that they address the issues for smaller providers, particularly those with the ECCE model. The wage talks must continue and workers in the childcare sector must have their qualifications and professionalism recognised. People, particularly women, are being pushed out of the workplace by unaffordable childcare. We have labour shortages and desperately need affordable childcare. Sinn Féin recognises that the cause and effects of climate change are not equally shared. The wealthiest 10% of the population emits nearly as much as the bottom 50%. At the heart of any green transition must be fairness. The only way we are going to deal with the climate emergency is through transformational and brave leadership, empowering households and communities and various sectors of the economy to take collective action. The allocation of windfall corporation tax into the Green Infrastructure Fund that may not be accessible next year raises the questions about the investment that is needed, the investment that's needed here and now. We are at the bottom 3 in the EU for share of energy use coming from renewables. It doesn't go unnoticed that the climate plan pushes all the hard work down the road, ensuring that all the heavy lifting is beyond the lifetime of this government. Even the lower targets government have set themselves have not been met. This is because too many people are being left out. The government's retrofit scheme does not work for most people. Social Justice Ireland have argued the scheme is deeply regressive. Last winter, 1 in 3 people in the state experienced energy poverty. The extent of energy deprivation is often hidden. We just don't know how many people don't turn on the heat because they fear that they can't afford it. Still, the government prioritises those with the greatest means over those in the greatest need. So a wealthy householder can access 25,000 of taxpayer-funded grants for a deep retrofit. Many with far greater need cannot access basic measures such as an attic or wall insulation. At the same time, they are punishing people that rely on solid fuel or heat for heat. Households that are often cold, rural homes with high emissions. We need to help households to move away from solid fuels rather than just penalise them. That is why Sinn Féin would introduce a specific scheme for households relying on solid fuel. The only way to meet retrofitting targets is to reform the unfair system and to ramp up investment. Sinn Féin would allocate an additional €182.5 million for residential and community retrofits and solar under the Department of Environment. The government's increased funding of €24 million in the face of a climate emergency is totally inadequate. In addition, we provided an additional €45 million for retrofits and solar under the Department of Housing. Sinn Féin would have allocated over €500 million in additional spending to climate-related policies. We would double the funding for the PV scheme, as well as put solar panels on every school. There's no other country with the same nature as Ireland. Our biodiversity is unique. We need to protect and enhance our biodiversity for future generations. And only 2% of our land is covered by native woodland. Sadly, there is nothing in this budget that reflects the scale of the emergency. With the right policies, this can be restored. The Citizens' Assembly on Biodiversity stated, "The ambition of the state needs to be significantly increased to reflect the scale of Ireland's biodiversity crisis." This budget does not do that. They go on to say, "This is likely to require substantial and sustained increase in expenditure, which should be made available immediately and guaranteed in the long term." We would invest £75.5 million in biodiversity, establishing a £50 million voluntary nature restoration fund. Investing in public transport is vital if we want to cut our emissions. Sinn Féin recognises projects such as the Western Rail Corridor and the Navan Rail Link line, amongst others, are not an optional extra. The government should make the 20% fare reduction and the 50% fare reduction for young people and students permanent. That absolutely needs to be permanent if you're serious about climate change. This is not the fault of people that live in rural areas that they don't have a public transport option. They should not be punished for the government failures to provide them with public transport. This should be done alongside a ramp-up in spending on the Connecting Ireland rural bus scheme, giving people alternatives and making a lasting difference in their lives. The just transition must be for individuals, for communities and for regions. But for far too long, areas in certain regions have been falling further and further behind. It is vital that we begin to really invest in infrastructure in the regions and the rural areas. It was mentioned in your speeches that, we'd wait for another economic downturn, and we have a fund for an economic downturn. But we cannot wait in the West and the North West to invest in infrastructure in that way, not only as part of a fair and just transition, but also to undo the years of underinvestment. This looks like yet another budget that will not reduce regional inequality. I'm greatly concerned that the expenditure is not even being assessed in terms of regional inequality. GDP of the North West has fallen 11% further below the EU average since Fine Gael came into power. The gap between incomes in the North West and the rest of the state is now 3 times higher than it was when you took over a decade ago. EU Regional Competitiveness Index shows the scale of the infrastructure deficit in the North West. Out of the 234 regions across the EU, the North West ranks 218th for infrastructure. That places the region in the bottom 7%, alongside some of the poorest regions in the EU. This government has no plan and no vision for rural Ireland, the West or the North West. This is evident in their unwillingness to commit to road and rail investment. It is evident in the lack of ambition for grid infrastructure for green energy. The region urgently needs roads and rail infrastructure, including the N17 and the Western Rail Corridor, as well as substantial investment in Knock Airport and in our regional airports. A grid capable of maximising the opportunities presented to a renewable offshore energy along the western seaboard. We have the expertise, we have the determination, and we have the local leadership to deliver on the promise of the Atlantic Economic Corridor. To do this, the West and the North West needs an infrastructure stimulus package. We didn't see it in this budget. What is good for the North West is good for the state as a whole. Pressure needs to be taken off the bigger urban centres. When we look at agriculture, we need to support family farms and fishing communities to enable that they are sustainable and financially viable. We are asking more and more from farmers in terms of climate and food security. Farmers and fishermen want a government that will work with them, not against them. Sinn Féin have long called for the increased payments of €20 for ewes and far greater support for suckler cows. We would like to have seen a €300 per cow. I am concerned to see only €33 million in additional core funding to cover the new measures, and will need to see those, obviously, in detail. When we look at justice, the increase in the trainee Garda allowance is the right decision, as Sinn Féin outlined in our alternative budget, when we called for the allowance to be doubled. This is finally a step in the right direction. It should never have taken this long to begin addressing the recruitment challenges. After 12 years of Fine Gael in charge of justice, there is a crisis in policing. This hasn't just happened, it's been allowed to become worse year on year. Fianna Fáil started closing the Garda stations and Fine Gael just carried on. There are fewer Gardaí and Garda stations now than there were before either of them took over the last government. People have a right to feel safe in their homes, on the streets and in their communities. 12 years of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil in the Department of Justice has done real harm to our justice system. Our defence forces are at a critical juncture. Due to the failures of successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments, there is a significant retention and recruitment crisis. In each year that you have been in office, more people have left the Defence Forces than joined. The Commission on the Defence Forces set out a need for additional capital expenditure of $250 million in 2020 figures each year for 10 years. Last year you missed the target by $70 million. You missed by $70 million again today. The single most important thing that can be done to address the retention and the recruitment crisis is the application of the Working Time Directive to the Defence Forces. But this budget makes no provision to either collect the data necessary or to implement the directive next year. Sinn Féin wants to build our defence forces so that they can protect the Irish neutrality and sovereignty. That won't happen without investment, and clearly it won't happen without Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Then we turn to Irish unity. It seems like that everyone is preparing for the reunification of our country, except the government. The budget again allocates no money for the preparation for reunification. We've seen the success of citizens' assemblies in addressing the big challenges and opportunities this state is faced with. Setting up a citizens' assembly to look at all aspects of Irish unity is a no-brainer. So to present a budget without provision for a citizens' assembly demonstrates just how far this government is removed from people and communities that want an opportunity to actively prepare. While this government remains in power, it's up to the rest of us. Academia, civil society, sports organisations and business communities, the wider public and the diaspora. So to push forward with preparing for the challenges and opportunities, we need to allocate dedicated research funding to empower people at all levels to continue this work, to begin imagining what a new Ireland can look like, what an Ireland without Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael can look like. And everyone has their part to play in this. No part is too great or too small. No one is too old or too young. People will see that the government has again failed to play its part in this budget. Yes, some people have been given back some of their own hard-earned money. We see people who have benefited at the cost of people who haven't. But too much of people's money continues to be squandered. Too much of hard-earned people's money continues to be wasted. Too much has been spent on layers and layers of bureaucracy. Too much has been spent without ever measuring the outcomes or evaluating where people's hard-earned money goes. Minister and spokespersons, week after week, stand up in this Dáil and their excuse for everything is we have allocated this or we've allocated that, without ever measuring. Does the money, for instance, that is allocated for disability, does it get to the children with disabilities? Does it get to the parents of children with disabilities? Does it get to the carers who are caring? Does it get to the people who are breaking their backs trying to keep this country going along? And it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is because this government doesn't care. I know that you want to continue business as usual, but the fact is, and the fact that everybody can see here today is, the longer this government are in power, the worse things people get for them and for their families.
Thank
you very much, Les Concorla. I'm sharing time with Deputy Duncan Smith. It's said that RTE does too many repeats, and so does this government. There is some truth in the hackneyed description that this is a late show budget with one for everyone in the audience. But it's worse still. It's a really in-the-ears budget, a lazy rerun of all that was wrong with Budget 2023. Tax cuts that favour the better off again, failure to properly fund the public services on which we all rely, and which the citizens of this rich republic should expect again, and a wall of once-off payments, but no permanent change. And once those once-off payments are gone, they're gone. A budget that will, yet again, be found to be regressive once lump sum payments melt away like snow on a ditch. And like the Late Show, we've changed the faces, but the formula is the same, no matter who's fronting the gig. Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil, it simply doesn't matter. In my almost 14 years here, I've rarely seen such frustration and anxiety among the general public. And there are many reasons for that. And this is the first time since 2010 that a Fianna Fáil finance minister has delivered a budget. And what do? You give nonsensical tax reliefs to landlords. Same old Fianna Fáil. €160 million in tax reliefs to landlords. More in tax reliefs to landlords than you provide cash-wise to individual renters. And having fixed the economy, 2016 to 2020 was the chance to fix our society, to build homes, to invest in public childcare, to get to grips with the climate catastrophe, to get our health service right, to start the work of tackling divisive inequality gaps, to build the foundations of a better and more sustainable future. But they were wasted years, and they're years for which we are still paying the price. Now fast forward to 2023. Under Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, Ireland is a country of contrasts, and yes, a country of contradictions. We're rich and poor at the same time, saving almost €7 billion in bank accounts last spring, when 2 out of every 5 of us can't lay our hands on €1,000 to meet an out-of-the-blue bill. Over 20% of us are officially in low pay, when Irish corporate profits break records. Yet we still cannot get the basics of running this country right. Now, as someone who's proud of our country, and prouder still of the great country we can be, it absolutely gives me no pleasure whatsoever to say that. And if a country ever donned the proverbial fur coat, and you know the rest of the old crude colloquialism, it is Ireland. Now, ministers, just read the piece in last Monday week's Financial Times. I took a look behind that tatty coat, and it asks, how can a rich country have, and I quote, transport, health, education and water services under increasing strain? Why can the 2/3 of young people imprisoned in the purgatory of their childhood bedroom not afford to rent or to realistically dream of owning their own home? Why are 1 in 10 Irish people on health waiting lists for more than 18 months when the official target is 3? Now, thankfully, and we should be grateful for this, nobody told them how much it costs a working family to get the kind of childcare that people in Denmark and people in Sweden, citizens of other rich countries, rightly take for granted. Now, that would have been embarrassing. And we are, as IBEC's Fergal O'Brien said to the Financial Times, nouveau riche. What is the point, he said, of us being a wealthy country if we don't have the things we need the most? Physical infrastructure, social and public services. IBEC got it in one. And the Irish Congress of Trade Unions agree, both sides of industry. But tax cuts. Tax cuts. The perennial Fine Gael answer to a question absolutely nobody's asking. I can't get an assessment for my child. You know what? How about a shiny tax cut instead? I'm 12 years on a housing waiting list. I know, but here's a £5 a week. Good luck to you. I could really do with more affordable childcare. Suppose you could, but there's a tenner back in your USC. Now jog on. Performative tax cuts. What we need are performing public services. Now, every euro in a tax cut, if not replaced by taxes elsewhere, is €1 less for the social wage. for schools, for hospitals, for childcare, for community safety. And the kind of tax cuts that were presented today that disproportionately favour the better off are as fiscally unwise as they are socially damaging. But throughout our party's long history, Labour was never short of vision. It was the resources we were always short of. Today, and on the evidence of this botched budget, well, we have the money. This government is woefully short of the vision we need to transform this society. €2.7 billion in once-off measures is no small sum of money. It's a lot of money, but spread so thinly that nobody will be happy. Such a wall of money and lump sum payments is no cause for backslapping, the likes of which we saw on the backbenches earlier on. That doesn't demand a standing ovation. The necessity of these once-off measures should be worn as a badge of shame by this Conservative coalition. Why are these interventions needed? They're needed because, under your watch, the real value of workers' wages has dropped. On your watch, living standards have fallen like a stone, and for the first time since we waved goodbye to the Troika in 2013. Under Fianna Fáil, yes, Fianna Fáil, the spending power of the pension has been effectively cut 3 budgets in a row. And where is Willie O'Dea when Fianna Fáil needs him? Over 20% of workers are still on low pay, and deprivation rates were up 4 points when you crafted last year's budget. One you had to follow up with a mini-budget in February because you got it so wrong this time last year. And you wouldn't need to spend so much today if you got things right then. Those who are most in need are still paying the price for below inflation social welfare increases last year. And remember, no increases to child benefit last year, no increases to the living alone allowance or child benefit at all. $2.7 billion in another so-called once-off package needed because you're too ideologically blinkered to make the structural changes needed to make our economy work better, to make it fairer. And here we have the return of our old friend, the energy credit, the very definition of an untargeted payment. Popular, yes, but populist too. A questionable use of public money, especially from those who pretend to be prudent. Let's put this in some context. You spent €1.2 billion this year handing out €600 of free money to me and hundreds of thousands of others who did not need and do not need it. €1.2 billion is €100 million less than you plan to spend on increases to all welfare schemes next year. It's multiples of what this government plans to spend on combating child poverty, and this absolutely beggars belief. The Labour's €3 billion package of cost of living measures targets the money where it's needed most. And October, and not just a Christmas bonus for those who need it most this year, not wait until January. €15 a month immediately in the pension, carers and other payments. And our party leader, Deputy Ivana Bacik's innovation, our €9 per month climate public transport ticket to relieve pressure on commuters, on students and to help our climate. A doubling of the rent credit to €1,000 now. Not €750, €1,000 and now. And crucially, an emergency €90 million empty homes fund to bring homes back into use for our young people and the almost 13,000 people who are living in desperate homelessness. Money to where it's needed the most and now. On every single top-line economic and fiscal measurement, Ireland is doing well. Income tax is up, VAT is up, employment is up, and the corporation tax figures speak for themselves. We have a surplus, and even when we strip away any so-called windfall corporation tax surpluses next year, we will still report a surplus. We're the envy of Europe on the revenue side, but the poor relation on economic equality and childcare, health and housing. And for too many, this budget won't change a thing. If you're poor today, you'll be poor tomorrow. And based on what we know now, you will be even poorer next year. Politics is about choices. And the choices made in this budget, at a time of unprecedented plenty, do simply not pass the tests of social solidarity and of fairness. Will it make the permanent changes needed to lift families and children out of poverty? No, it simply won't. Will it truly reward work by actually using our taxes the way workers want them used to fund the care system that is the mark of a decent society? It doesn't. Will it deliver the step change on housing our young people and the future competitiveness of our economy so desperately needs. That's a big fat no too. But Labour's €11 billion costed package maps out an Ireland that works for all. Not just an Ireland that works if you earn over 70 grand a year, not just an Ireland that works if you own your own home, not just an Ireland that works if the cost of living crisis is something you've only heard about on the news. On work, on care, on housing, on climate, we need an Ireland that works for all. Now, Ireland's low pay problem is chronic. 1 in 5 are officially low paid. And our welfare system, as you know only too well, Taoiseach, having served as a Minister for Social Protection, must do far too much heavy lifting to keep our working poor out of poverty. And there is no dignity in our working poor, or anybody who works for a living, having to rely on cash transfers from the Department of Social Protection merely to exist or to subsist. That's why, in Labour's view, the national minimum wage must go up €2 an hour to €13.30 and not €1.40. In fact, it is manifestly obvious that we wouldn't have the kinds of national minimum wage increases that we've experienced in the last few years if it were not for the introduction by Labour of the Low Pay Commission. There is no way on this God's earth that Fine Gael left alone would do that if the decision was theirs. We need to move more quickly to a real living wage, not the rebranded, watered-down version government has in mind. In our costed alternative budget, Labour has ring-fenced €1.3 billion for a new public service pay agreement. The talks have yet to commence, but this allows for, in the region of a cumulative 5% increase next year for our nurses, our healthcare assistants, teachers, SNAs, guards, council workers and civil servants. Looking at the documents, there doesn't seem to be any government allocation for public sector pay rises at all. Where is that allocation? We need to know. And in fact, Sinn Féin's allocation in their own alternative budget should make public servants who require a pay increase next year equally concerned. The truth is, when we look at public service pay, when we take inflation into account, public sector pay is at 2012 levels, and the rate of pay increases are in fact in recent years well below the rates of increase in the private sector. The Justice Minister has yet again shown us that she has no deafness of touch whatsoever when it comes to An Garda Síochána. I want to focus for a moment on Garda pay. At a time when a record 114 Gardaí have hung up their boots already this year, when communities are in crisis, when they're demanding community policing to feel more secure in their own homes and their communities, you stick a few euros on the training allowance. That's a Hail Mary pass, if I ever saw one, hoping everything will work out well. Now, how has this figure worked out? Nobody seems to know. It was plucked from the air. It just doesn't make sense. €305 up from 184. That's less than the current rate of the national minimum wage. Less than the national minimum wage. That's what we're expecting new Garda recruits to exist on. That's an insult to a new recruit. Taoiseach, you yourself have admitted that new recruits are often older than former intakes and are leaving jobs, good jobs in some cases, to join the Guards. And some, of course, will have families and financial commitments, and your public comments admit that. But at this rate, they won't be queuing up to join or to stay in training in Templemore. In fact, they won't be able to complete their training at all. And something much more radical needs to be done. For a small €15 million a year, as proposed by Labour, new recruits could be put on the starting salary for a Garda of €35,000 across their training period. And if the Minister is serious about making a Garda Síochána an attractive proposition for the right kind of recruit, this is what she needs to do, and she needs to do it now. We get a real sense of this government's priorities when we look at the social protection package. It's incredible that the tax cut and the 2024 welfare package are more or less the same size. But when you dig a little deeper, they're not. The tax package amounts to €1.3 billion. €1.3 billion in tax cuts. The social welfare package is, wait for it, €1.1 billion. Go figure. At a time when people are finding it exceptionally difficult to make ends meet, and we know who those most impacted by the inflation and cost of living crisis are. Just look at this. A quick analysis will show if you're a single person on €75,000 who owns your own home, you're up over €2,000 already, thanks to your mortgage interest rate squeeze and income tax and USC changes. For a pensioner in a council house who can't keep themselves warm, it's about €700 or €800. So who needs a break more? And clearly from this budget, the government has picked a side, and it's sticking to it. When welfare rates needed to be increased by €27.50 a week, you give 12. This isn't a figure that Labour has plucked out of the air. When we're going to look at our welfare system, when are we going to look at our welfare system through the lens of income adequacy, the well-established benchmark of minimum essential standard of living? Society actually has a settled view that core welfare payments must be set at 34% of average income. Actually, Fianna Fáil used to believe the same, but that was back in 2007. And a lot has changed since then. You've moved away from that principle. This year's budget leaves those who are depending on small and fixed incomes still gasping for air. That's why Labour is clear. We actually need to grow up, we need to mature, and we need to decide, as a society, to index our social welfare and personal tax systems. It will be the mark of a mature democracy if this was just done automatically, routinely, every year, rather than using the summer months, filling the papers with speculation and spin ahead of the budget being finalised, playing with people's lives. Now that would be a game changer. The Social Protection Minister knows only too well that there is an extra cost involved in living with a disability. We need to see a new cost of disability payment, as Labour has called for, starting at €20 a week in this budget. That's the kind of reform we need for people with disabilities who need help to live with dignity, not the Tory-inspired racket that this government looked set to propose a few weeks ago. I'm pleased to see that the process of pay-related benefits seems to have commenced at last. We don't have the detail, and Labour has gone some way to proposing an initiation of that process in our own costed alternative budget. But the Minister's long-awaited initiative has come far too late for the people I represent who work, or did work, in Tara Mines. And I heard the Minister speak of the fate of the workers in Tara Mines on the radio on Sunday. Our view is that the Tara Mines job losses could have been avoided in their entirety if government took Labour's long-standing advice to establish a German-style short-time work scheme with seed funding of €400 million. We wouldn't be talking now about people who are out of work, we'd be talking about supporting people in work and with training and skills development when they are furloughed. And I note that government has said today that they are starting to make adjustments to the PRSI base on a cumulative basis over the next period of time. 0.1% increases in PRSI across the board, when in fact what's ultimately needed, because we know that employers' PRSI is well behind the EU norm, is more significant increases to bring those levels up to EU norm in terms of employers' PRSI. This is the responsible thing to do for the workers of today, the pensioners of the future. And setting up a dedicated wealth fund to help with ageing costs should not mean that we pretend that ageing costs are covered. They're not, and they never could be covered by a fund the likes of which government is proposing and the likes of which we support. Now, there's never been a better time to start adjusting PRSI. Why do I say that? It's not just my hunch, it's what all of the experts say. Full employment, a red-hot economy of capacity, a precarious and unbalanced tax system. This government really needs to get a move on and stop avoiding unpopular decisions. You're proposing a back-of-the-envelope scheme to help small businesses shoulder extra costs. Now, we understand the motivation of this initiative, but it has all the hallmarks of a sop, a bribe to business. And how it's designed and applied is crucially important. We don't have the detail. Now, Labour has no difficulty with the concept of support schemes for viable enterprises going through a difficult time. We have shown that time and again. But there must be, in any transfer of wealth from taxpayers to enterprise. There must be social, labour, quality job and collective bargaining conditions attached. Or have we not learned any lessons at all from the operation of the wage subsidy scheme, for example? And we also must be conscious as well, from what we read in the media, it seems that this money is being taken from commercial rates. So who is going to fill the hole left in public service provision for our local authorities? And any such scheme must be limited to firms of a certain size and legal structure. I want to turn now, Minister, to the question of child poverty. I have to admit that my heart danced a little last December when I heard the Taoiseach pledge that he would tackle child poverty head-on. I was delighted, but I should have been more wary. This government shamefully has not passed its very first test on child poverty. We needed a children's budget to end child poverty. Instead, we got a budget for landlords, some homeowners and higher earners. Minister, in 2022, nearly 200,000 children lived in households that were below the poverty line. And 250,000 children were living in households experiencing deprivation. Now, child poverty is a national scandal. It's a national scandal. It must be ended. But we know today that will not be ended by this government. In fact, the Taoiseach would have been better off saying nothing in December. This is an insult to the poorest children and the poorest families in this country. He would have been better off keeping his mouth shut and saying nothing. He has raised expectations that child poverty could be eradicated in this country, and he's done nothing about it. Labour proposed a series of measures, including making a good start by increasing the qualified child payment to €15 for children over 12 and €10 for the under 12s. What did you do? You added a miserable €4, €4 a week to the qualified child payment. And it's nowhere near sufficient to give every child in this country a fair break and a decent start. Minister, while poverty is not only about money, it's actually always about money. And every single member, Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Green Party should hang their heads in collective shame today. That promise has not been delivered on. And what we ultimately want to see is a movement towards the kind of programme that the ESRI and the Community Foundation of Ireland have proposed. And that is a second tier of child benefit payment for those in real need, targeted at those children who need it the most, to eradicate the scourge of child poverty. Nowhere does this budget disappoint more than when it comes to childcare. It's promised little and it's delivered less. The Minister's only just managed to persuade his Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael colleagues at the 11th hour that childcare fees should come down by the promised 25%. It's an 11th hour job designed to avoid the blushes. Nowhere does this budget disappoint more. Of course, the 25% cut that the Minister spoke about won't come into effect, in fact, till next September 2024. It's almost a year away. So for children who started creche in 2019 or 2020, their parents will only have seen one reduction during their time in early years. The situation is stark for parents, for children and for skilled professionals in the sector. The picture painted by the results of a survey recently undertaken by my colleague Senator Marie Sherlock in Dublin Central is revealing, and in my experience the results are bang on the money. Nearly half of parents cutting back on working hours to make childcare arrangements work. 21% said one parent had to give up work. Severe shortage of places for babies under 1. Services that are barely affordable if they're available at all. Small and agile services that have been around for a long time, some of them, closing. A picture any of us representing urban Ireland will recognise. So when are we going to wake up and decide to revolutionise how we do quality early years in Ireland? The course we are on is manifestly not the right one. We need a system built on equality for children, affordability for parents and fairness for professionals. It's why Labour says we need to get a start on our vision of a universal public childcare system with 5,000 to 6,000 places at a cost of €65 million in 2024, a cap of €200 a month in fees and an increased investment of €142 million in core funding as a glide path to fair pay for professionals. Now, a minimum of €92 million was the cost that the SIP2 Big Start campaign costed and said was needed to improve paying conditions by at least €2 an hour. A further 50 million then would be needed to recognise length of service and qualifications. That's what's needed to truly revolutionise our early years system. Now, this government have been criminally ill-prepared for the crisis in care that's developing, and the census laid this bare. Between 2016 and 22, the number of people providing regular unpaid care increased by over 50%, from just under 200,000 people in 2016 to 300,000 in 2022. What a level of growth. And we still have too many people who care full-time for a loved one whose work is not adequately recognised by this state. We could change that overnight. For a very small amount of money, we could make sure that at least everyone in receipt of the respite grant gets the carer's allowance in recognition of their invaluable work. It's time for the lip service to end. And our party leader, Deputy Malabachik, was not wrong when she said that housing is the civil rights issue of our time. But this third government doesn't see housing as an issue of rights. For you, housing is a commodity, and a house is something to transact, an asset to buy and sell. And when the eye-catching budget intervention on housing are tax relief for landlords and mortgage interest relief, what's left of your credibility is gone. Now, reintroducing mortgage interest relief is an interesting use of public money. Those on fixed-rate mortgages, those who fixed their rates maybe last year or the year before, are rightly asking today, what about me? And it seems you'll need, insofar as what we know about this scheme, 2 years of mortgage interest statements to qualify for the scheme. So what about those who are on fixed mortgages? And what happens next year, for example, if somebody comes off a fixed rate into a very, very different interest rates environment? That's a question, and it's populism, this government cannot seem to answer. Housing for All is a busted flush. The lifetime of your signature plan, all we've got to thank you for is a 50% rise in homelessness, record rents and record house prices. 4,000 homeless children, and you swear blind that your grand plan is working. Your plan is failing, and today's budget tells me all you're going to do is fail better. Your limp, anemic, vacant homes tax is set so low that you've had to review it before you even start sending out the bills. You announced it a year ago, and the rubber still hasn't hit the road. Your hands-off approach to vacancy and dereliction is an utter disgrace.
Hear, hear.
It is state-sponsored vandalism, and the victims are first-time buyers and communities across the country. We have anything between, depending on what you read, 25,000, 70,000 or 170,000 homes lying idle in the Ireland of 2023. You're not switched off that you can't even properly measure the scale of the problem because you simply don't seem to care. Because property and property rights means everything to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Until that changes, nothing will change. If you can afford to leave a home vacant for years, or a building you own derelict and abandoned, your pocket should be squeezed until the pips squeak. And that's why Labour says, slap a levy of 1% of value, €2,000, whatever's the highest, on the owners of vacant homes. Get it moving, or the council should put a CPO on it. And disgracefully, this tells you all you need to know about Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. You've decided to kick the residential zone land tax into touch for another year. The farmers got to you, the developers got to you, and government still sneers at Labour's plans for 1 million homes over 10 years. 50,000 new builds and 50,000 vacancies, empty council homes and derelict would-be dwellings turned around to meet the needs of a growing population and our economic needs too. That's the level of ambition we need. It's the level of ambition Fianna Fáil, true to what they like us to think their values were back in their halcyon days, would do. And yes, there are capacity issues, and one way you could deal with that is by, for example, paying apprentices at least the rate of the national minimum wage, giving the housing agency responsibility for construction skills. This could all be done at the stroke of a pen if the political will is there. And in the meantime, those who can manage to find a place to rent need the rent credit to be up to the €1,000, not the €750 you announced today, and you need to take on board Labour's Renters' Rights Bill and institute a scheme of no-fault eviction so the law protects people in insecure tenancies. But there is simply no substitution for supply and public supply at that. Labour's plan is very, very clear indeed. What we would do is do much more than the government is prepared to do this year. In fact, across all capital programmes, you only plan to spend an additional €250 million. We would inject another €1.6 billion into capital investment to build, for example, 2,700 more social homes, building on your own less than adequate proposals. And I'll conclude on this. Labour is ambitious for Ireland, but we are responsible too. And I want to speak for a moment about the role of the state and the plans brought forward by the Minister today in relation to the use of the surplus. We agree that the surplus in corporation tax should not be spent on current expenditure. It should be used, for example, to build the homes that we need in the future. It should be used as well to make sure that the just transition actually means something. That transition phase has not been scoped out for people. We need to make sure that that investment that's required for communities across the country is injected, is used wisely and is used properly. And finally, I'll say this. We need a discussion on tax. It is simply not good enough to say we can continue to spend and tax the way we are at the moment, continuing to reduce taxes while increasing spending. We've yet to have a debate in this House on proposals from the Commission on Tax and Welfare this time last year. This government is afraid of it. This government is afraid of it because the Commission has rightly proposed that we move away from taxes on income, on labour, and towards taxes on assets and capital. That's the future. That's what needs to be done. Government needs to mature and grow up, take on that responsibility, and make sure we've got a tax system that works to make an Ireland that works for all.
Last year I stood here with my colleagues in the Labour Party hoping that we'd have a budget that would provide that very thing, hope, for people who are looking for a home, hope to tackle our climate crisis, to tackle the cost of living,